Picture a winter evening at the close of a century. Snow coming down on cobblestone roads, gas lights shining through heavy fog, and the far-off sound of church bells floating in the chilly air. It is Christmas, 1901, the last Christmas of the Victorian times, a time of horse-pulled carriages, letters written by hand, fireplaces burning coal, and customs formed over many years. A time ruled by a queen who has been on the throne longer than any other British ruler. In just a few weeks, things will shift. A new king, a new century, and a lifestyle slipping away into the past. December 1901 came softly to the British Isles. Winter had started early that year, covering roofs and graveyards with frost that stuck to stone until the morning sun rose. Days were short and nights were long in that season. But Christmas created a usual pattern. For much of the nation, daily life went on as it always did. Coal fires burned in big and small homes. Shop owners opened up before the sun came up. Mail carriers picked up bags of letters written by hand. Carriages moved over cobblestones, making shiny paths where wheels pushed through icy slush. It was a view that would seem normal for many past generations. But under the regular habits of winter, something else was there. A soft feeling that a period was reaching its finish. For years, Christmas in Britain had been formed by Victorian thoughts, family meetings, trees with decorations, songs giving to the poor, and a clear split between old ways and new ones. The Industrial Revolution had altered the country, but the center of the holiday still came from ancient habits. Houses had holly and ivy for decoration. Churches got ready for winter gatherings. Families set up meals weeks ahead, their kitchens full of the scent of spices and fresh bread. The holiday was as much about remembering as about having fun. But this specific winter had a strange feeling. Queen Victoria, who had ruled since 1837, was getting weaker in health. Most people had never known another ruler. Her role had stayed the same through battles, new creations, and changes in government. Now, her long time in power was coming close to an end. Newspapers talked carefully about her state, seldom using straight words, but folks got the idea from what was said. The nation felt that time was going only one way. Away from the palace, the world kept up its holiday patterns. In the north areas, snow-blanketed farms and mining places. Workers went long ways in cold mornings to get to factories where iron shops, mills, and boatyards kept running through winter. In little villages, the local pace went on. Markets, schools, church meetings, and the coming of the weekly paper with news from London. In cities, life seemed different. London stayed the center of the empire, busy, noisy, and always moving. Steam from trains floated over station areas. Gas lamps lit up through evening fog. Big stores set up their windows with Christmas shows using fake snow and bright ribbons to pull in buyers. Railways moved packages and letters across the land at speeds hard to think about a century before. Even in winter conditions, the country stayed linked by an industrial system that had turned into part of normal life. Yet the season was tough for lots of people. Cold smoke got thicker in the chilly air, holding fog until it got close to the roads. Homes without good airflow gathered soot on their walls. In poorer parts, families had a hard time staying warm. Kids wore coats with patches. Factories took on workers for long shifts even during the holidays. Sickness from winter spread fast in packed areas. Doctors and local groups got ready for a hard time. But Christmas gave a break, even for those with not much. Churches set up meals for the poor. Groups for giving handed out blankets and coal. Local shops gave food, and some bosses gave workers little extra pay. In London, Edinburgh, Liverpool, and Manchester, groups served food to thousands. Many families living on pay that just covered bread and rent put aside what they could to make a holiday meal, a basic roast, sweet pudding, or oranges from winter markets. In richer homes, getting ready was big. Cooks and helpers worked days to make Christmas dinners with roasted meats, vegetables, pastries, and fruit from other countries. Sitting rooms had garlands and candles. Gifts were wrapped in colored paper, often made at home. Guests came by train from far towns to be with family for the holiday. Rooms filled with music, talk, and games with cards. For Britain's higher classes, Christmas was a time of ease and safety, a way to enjoy steadiness in a changing time. Across the empire, the season looked different in places. In Canada, winter came with deep snow and frozen rivers. People went by sleigh, covered in thick coats. Churches set up group meetings where music and candlelight made the hard season softer. In Australia and South Africa, December meant heat instead of cold. Families had fun outside, with picnics, going to church, and giving gifts under summer skies. Soldiers posted away marked the holiday as they could, sometimes with a basic meal, sometimes with letters sent home overseas. The empire was huge, reaching over lands, weather, and ways of life. Yet in December 1901, millions felt the season with some link to British custom. Songs, church services, Christmas trees, and gift-giving were no longer just on the aisles. Years of people moving, trade, and control over lands had taken habits to far places. Back home, the last weeks of the year went in a usual way. Streets had lots of buyers, post offices dealt with more mail than any other time. Newspapers put out holiday stories and ads for winter items. Churches set up concerts and events for giving. Kids waited eagerly for the holiday, even if their families could give only small gifts. For many, Christmas was a time to think about time passing. The 19th century had brought new things that changed life. Railways, telegraphs, electric lights, photography, and city growth like never before. Britain had turned into the middle of a world empire with big say over trade, government, and ways of life. The country saw itself as up to date, strong, and proud of what it did. But it also had problems with unfairness and fights that did not get much better with the season. And in the back of December 1901, the coming end of the Victorian time made a long shadow. Queen Victoria's time away from public eyes made people remember that change was close. Her pictures hung in homes, schools, and public spots. Coins, stamps, and official papers had her face. Her rule had become the way generations saw history. Losing that person meant going into a new future. Families talked about the Queen in soft talks. Some recalled her crowning, the early years with her husband, and the death of Prince Albert. Others knew her only as a far symbol, a face on money or in painted pictures. No matter the personal recall, her name was tied to the time itself. Victorian Britain was not just dates, it was who they were. As Christmas got closer, the nation mixed usual holiday happiness with a soft sense of not knowing. Newspapers put out careful news on the Queen's state using words like getting better, resting, or steady. Few took these fully. The doctors visiting, family members, and official quiet said more than the printed words. Still, the season kept its usual path. Choirs practiced in churches with stone walls that sent their voices back through spaces lit by candles. Street players did carols for people walking by. Families got gifts ready, even small ones, because the custom mattered more than the price. Kids wrote to Santa Claus, a person whose role in British life had grown over the 19th century. Christmas cards, cheap, bright, and sold everywhere, carried wishes through the mail, letting friends and family far away share the holiday. In many towns, school kids got small oranges, books, or sweets as part of local giving events. Hospitals and places for orphans set up meetings where helpers brought food and clothes. Though being poor was common, the idea of giving was seen as a key part of the season. For those who could pay, giving was viewed as a right thing to do. Winter nights came early. By late afternoon, streets got dark. Gas lamps flickered along walkways, their light softened by fog. Smoke from chimneys stayed low over homes, blending with cold air. In city backways, workers went home from long work, their coats covered with soot. In country villages, families sat near fireplaces, the heat from coal or wood keeping out the cold. The sound of church bells moved through the air, calling for evening services or holiday events. Across Britain, the pace of life followed known ways. But knowing this might be the last Christmas of the Victorian era made the season feel not the same, quieter, more thoughtful. History was ready to move on. No one knew what the next part would hold, but people knew they were at the start of something different. Outside the empire, change was also clear. In the United States, President William McKinley had been killed 3 months before, and Theodore Roosevelt had become president. In Europe, growing industrial countries competed for power. New groups and fights shaped talks between countries. Technology grew in every big city. Electric trams, telephones, and automobiles showed up on roads that once had only horses and carriages. The world was changing fast, even if daily life still seemed tied to older habits. Britain, sure of its place in the world, watched these things. Inventors, scientists, and builders added to world progress. Newspapers told about new thoughts and new things. Yet in many homes, the changes seemed far. The normal family felt modernity little by little, one small, better thing at a time: a bicycle, a new tool, a brighter light. Industrial growth had reshaped people, but custom stayed the main part of home life. During the winter of 1901, the difference between past and future showed up everywhere. Christmas trees with candles stood in rooms lit by gas, while electric bulbs started showing in richer homes. Horse-pulled carriages still filled the streets, but early automobiles got looks wherever they went. Steam railways stayed the main way to travel, yet telegraph lines sent messages at speeds hard to think about before. Britain lived between centuries, with one foot in the time of coal and the other in the time of electricity, and at the center of this time stood a key person, Queen Victoria, whose sickness reminded the nation that history was ready to shift path. No official word would stop Christmas fun, but the knowledge stayed in every part of public life. The Queen had ruled during the growth of the modern world. Her leaving would mark the end of the era named after her as December went toward Christmas Day. Families got meals ready, wrote letters, and gathered gifts. Markets stayed busy. Churches planned services and kids counted the nights left. The season went on as it always did, but the feeling under it was clear. This was not just another winter. It was the last winter of the Victorian age, a season at the edge of time. In the final weeks of 1901, Queen Victoria stayed the main person of the British Empire. Yet she was almost completely out of sight. Her portrait hung in schools, post offices, government buildings, and railway stations. Coins, stamps, medals, and official documents carried her image. Most living Britons had never known another monarch. For more than 60 years, her presence had been constant. But in the winter of 1901, the Queen spent her days in seclusion. Far from public gatherings and state ceremonies, her health had been declining for many months. Age had taken a gradual but unmistakable toll. By early winter, she suffered from reduced mobility, failing eyesight, and persistent fatigue. Physicians monitored her closely. Although the palace rarely released medical details, it became clear that her condition was serious. Official bulletins used diplomatic language, words such as indisposed and resting, but the public recognized that these phrases were used. Only when real concern existed, the Queen chose to stay at Osbourne House, her private residence on the Isle of Wight. For decades, it had been her retreat from London, away from the demands of court life. The estate overlooked the Solent with quiet lawns, gardens, and gently sloping hills. In her younger years, she visited frequently with her family. After the death of Prince Albert in 1861, Osbourne House became a place of privacy and mourning. By 1901, it had become not only a residence, but a refuge. As winter settled over the country, members of the royal family began to arrive there. Their visits were not announced publicly, but reports of their movements reached newspapers. Railway stations observed royal trains passing through. Servants and household officials noticed carriages arriving at unusual hours. Each arrival confirmed what the palace would not say directly. The Queen was failing. The Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, traveled to her side. His presence removed any doubt among government officials. He had waited longer than any heir in British history to succeed the throne. Now the transition seemed inevitable. Senior politicians kept close contact, prepared for the moment when authority would pass from mother to son. Inside Osbourne House, corridors stayed quiet. Servants moved carefully, aware that noise traveled easily through the walls. Senior members of the household monitored every detail: meals, schedules, medical needs, and correspondence. Victoria had always been attentive to government matters, even in old age, but her ability to work diminished during the final months of 1900 and the opening days of 1901. She continued reading state papers, but responses grew shorter, and dictation replaced much of her handwriting. Throughout her reign, the monarch's health was treated as a matter of national stability. The government believed that public confidence depended on the image of a strong, capable sovereign. For this reason, Palace secrecy was not unusual. Doctors reported directly to senior officials, and news was shared only when absolutely necessary. This policy created a gap between the crown and the public, a respectful distance, but also a barrier to understanding. Newspapers, cautious not to appear disrespectful, wrote carefully. Articles described the Queen as recovering strength or resting comfortably. Editors avoided direct speculation, but public interest was impossible to ignore. Victoria's long rule had shaped modern Britain. The empire had expanded dramatically during her lifetime. Industrial power, scientific progress, and global influence all flourished under her name. The idea of a world without her felt unfamiliar. Ordinary citizens followed the news as best they could. Some wrote letters to newspapers expressing hope for her recovery. Others prepared themselves for change. Churches included prayers for the Queen in their Christmas services. Local officials gave speeches acknowledging her years of leadership. The sense of uncertainty was quiet but widespread. It was not only Britain that watched. Royal families across Europe were tied to Victoria by blood. Her children and grandchildren had married into major dynasties: German, Russian, Danish, Greek, and Spanish. Messages of concern traveled by telegraph from foreign courts. Diplomats observed events closely. A change in the British throne would affect international relations, alliances, and diplomatic priorities. The Queen had acted as a symbolic anchor for European monarchies. Her passing would alter that balance. Inside the palace, January arrived with a noticeable decline. Doctors visited more frequently, staying for long consultations. The Queen's appetite weakened. She spent most of her time resting. The few public statements released through the press were shorter than usual. Government ministers prepared for the possibility of her death. Procedures were reviewed for proclamation of a new monarch, national mourning, and funeral arrangements. The Prince of Wales remained at Osbourne House. His sisters, Princess Helena and Princess Louise, also stayed close. Other members of the family arrived as news traveled through private channels. Their presence confirmed what the public suspected. The final days of the reign were approaching. By mid-January, the situation could no longer be softened. The palace informed the press that the Queen was seriously ill. Newspapers published the announcement on front pages using solemn language. No details were given, but the message was clear. Citizens gathered outside Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle to read official notices posted on gates and walls. Church bells rang slowly, marking concern rather than celebration. Across Britain, work continued as normal. Trains ran, factories operated, and shops opened. Yet the national mood felt suspended. A sense of historical weight settled over daily life. People understood that they were witnessing the closing chapter of an era that had shaped their world. Many families spoke quietly about the Queen during meals and gatherings. Older generations remembered the early years of her reign when the empire was smaller and industrial growth had only begun. Younger Britons knew only a world ruled by Victoria on January 22, 1901. The Queen died at Osbourne House. She was 81 years old. Her reign had lasted more than 63 years. It was the longest in British history up to that point. Her death was announced first to government officials, then to the press, and finally to the empire. Telegraph wires carried the news across Britain within minutes. It traveled by cable to Canada, India, Africa, and beyond. Newspapers printed special editions. Shops lowered their shutters. Schools and government offices closed for the day. Public buildings draped black cloth over entrances and balconies. Flags flew at half-mast. Church bells tolled in every major town and city. Victoria's life and reign had become symbolic of an entire century. She had ruled during the rise of industrial power, during wars and reforms, through scientific discoveries and technological transformations. Under her leadership, Britain became a global empire connected by railways, steamships, and telegraph lines. The modern world developed around her throne. In the weeks that followed, national mourning unfolded with careful ceremony. The Queen's coffin traveled from the Isle of Wight to London, then to Windsor. Crowds lined streets and railway platforms, standing silently as the procession passed. Newspapers published long memorials. Photographs and illustrations appeared in journals and magazines. Foreign governments issued formal statements of condolence. For many people, her death marked not only the loss of a monarch, but the end of a historical identity. The Victorian era, an age defined by industry, empire, social discipline, and rapid change, was over. The new century belonged to different ideas, technologies, and challenges. With Victoria's passing, her son became King Edward VII. A new reign had begun. But in the winter of 1901, the nation still lived in the shadow of the Queen who had shaped its world. Christmas had come and gone quietly. The empire had celebrated as tradition required, but with the awareness that something was ending. The final Victorian Christmas had passed in silence. With the monarch hidden from view, her condition carefully guarded, and her presence felt only through absence. The Queen's long life closed in the privacy of Osbourne House behind guarded doors, surrounded by family and doctors, far from the public ceremonies that once defined her reign. The age she represented faded with her, leaving Britain to step into a new century without the steady figure who had watched over it for so long. December in London carried a familiar mixture of cold air, thick fog, and steady movement. The capital of the British Empire did not slow for winter. It simply adapted. Short daylight hours meant that most of the day passed under dim skies. With the sun low on the horizon and the streets lit by lamps, even in early afternoon, frost clung to railings and windows. Breath turned to mist in the air. And everywhere the smell of burning coal followed residents through the city. Coal was the energy that kept London alive. Nearly every home, factory, shop, and public building relied on it for heat and light. Each chimney produced its own thin column of smoke, and on cold, windless days, those columns settled over the city like a heavy blanket. Fog mixed with soot particles, forming the thick pea soup fogs that became part of London's identity. Visibility dropped until street lamps appeared only as faint circles of light in the gray air. People walked slowly, trusting their memory of street layouts, familiar corners, and the sound of horses approaching. The noise of the city continued through the haze. Carriage wheels struck cobblestones with a steady rhythm. Horses snorted and shook their heads as clouds of warm breath escaped into the cold air. Drivers called warnings through the fog, sometimes dismounting to lead their horses by hand when the roads became too unclear to navigate. Omnibuses carried passengers along the main routes, while steam trains entered and left stations, their engines adding to the cloud of smoke already hanging overhead. London was the largest city in the world in 1901. More than 6 million people lived in its neighborhoods. From wealthy squares to crowded tenements, winter revealed the differences clearly. On the wide streets near Kensington, Mayfair, and Belgravia, families with servants decorated their windows for Christmas. Light spilled from dining room chandeliers, warming the fronts of houses. Delivery boys carried parcels to the doors, their arms full of ribbons, boxes, and fresh produce. In the East End, near Whitechapel and Stepney, winter looked different. Thousands of families shared narrow rooms with thin walls and limited heat. Coal was expensive. Many households used only what they could afford, burning a small fire that heated one corner of a room. Clothes hung near the hearth to dry from the damp air. Children wore layers of patched coats and gloves with missing fingers. The cold reached into every gap of the old brick buildings. Yet even there, Christmas stirred activity. Street markets opened early in the morning. Vendors set up stalls under canvas roofs, brushing frost from wooden tables. They sold vegetables, bread, fish, potatoes, and meat. Shoppers bargained for prices, stretching wages to afford a small holiday meal. In December, oranges from southern Europe appeared in greater numbers along with nuts, apples, and sweets. For many children, fruit counted as a Christmas gift in itself. In larger markets, such as Covent Garden, horses pulled heavy carts loaded with produce, flowers, and goods transported by rail. Workers carried crates on their shoulders, navigating through crowds of buyers. The sounds of bargaining, movement, and clattering wheels filled the air. Winter mornings were cold, but business continued without pause. London relied on steady trade. The size of the population demanded it. Bakeries provided warmth and comfort during the season. Early each morning, the smell of fresh bread drifted into the streets. Customers stepped inside to escape the cold for a few minutes. Some bakeries sold pastries for Christmas sweet buns, fruit loaves, and mincemeat pies. Families who could not afford such luxuries bought simple bread and saved whatever they could for the holiday meal. For wealthier households, shopping looked very different. Department stores had become a major part of London's commercial life by 1901. Harrods in Knightsbridge, Whiteley's in Bayswater, and other grand stores decorated their entrances with garlands, ribbons, and displays meant to attract crowds. Their windows showed toys, jewelry, clothing, and imported goods, everything from German dolls to French perfume to chocolates wrapped in gold paper. Inside, clerks moved between counters. Customers viewed items arranged under gaslight or newly installed electric bulbs. Purchase records from the era show an increase in Christmas spending among middle and upper-class families. Gift-giving had expanded during the late 19th century, moving from a small family custom to a major social expectation. Children especially felt the excitement. Toy shops became some of the busiest places in the city. Wooden trains, spinning tops, tin soldiers, puzzles, and music boxes filled shelves. Newspapers printed advertisements for new mechanical toys and dolls with painted porcelain faces. Even children who could not afford toys pressed their faces against shop windows to watch the displays. The Postal Service worked at its busiest pace of the year. Millions of letters and cards moved through sorting offices. Christmas cards had become a British tradition after the 1840s, made possible by cheaper printing and the penny postage system. By 1901, nearly every family that could afford a stamp sent cards to friends, relatives, and distant acquaintances. Postmen carried heavy bags through the streets, delivering mail daily, even on Christmas morning in some areas. Churches filled with activity as well. Choirs practiced hymns and carols. Stone buildings echoed with rehearsal music. Many towns organized special services to collect donations for coal funds, soup kitchens, and orphanages. Christmas charity had become a cornerstone of Victorian moral culture. Newspapers encouraged the wealthy to contribute. The Salvation Army and other organizations organized food drives and clothing distributions. In some cities, thousands of poor children received small meals or gifts funded by community donations. Coal shortages and overcrowded housing meant illness increased in winter. Hospitals prepared for higher numbers of patients. Pneumonia and bronchitis were common. Doctors visited homes in poorer districts reporting difficult conditions. Still, London maintained a working rhythm. Factories ran even in deep cold. Railway stations saw constant traffic, carrying passengers, traveling to visit relatives or to attend holiday gatherings. The industrial city rarely rested. And yet, despite harsh conditions, winter changed the appearance of London in ways that people remembered fondly. Snow covered rooftops and softened the noisy streets. Even polluted fog took on a different quality beneath gas lamps, where the light formed halos around the metal posts. In wealthier districts, carriages delivered guests to dinners and parties, drawing rooms filled with music from pianos or string instruments, families read aloud, played games, or exchanged small gifts. For working-class families, celebration was quieter but still present. A warm meal shared at a table, a candle lit in a window, children hanging simple stockings. Small traditions mattered as much as grand ones. The city's diversity meant that Christmas did not look the same everywhere. Jewish neighborhoods prepared for Hanukkah, not Christmas. Irish Catholic communities held their own services and gatherings. Some families, especially recent immigrants, adopted only parts of the British holiday tradition. Others continued customs brought from abroad. London absorbed these differences as it absorbed everything slowly, unevenly, but permanently. Industrial Britain shaped the rhythm of daily life. The clatter of machines and factories did not stop for falling snow. Workers left their homes before sunrise and returned after dark. Men carried lunch tins to shipyards. Women and children worked in textile mills. Coal laborers hauled heavy sacks across icy ground. The city's prosperity relied on labor that did not pause for weather or holiday. Even so, on Christmas Day, many workplaces closed. Churches filled with families, some arriving in their best clothing, others wearing the only clothes they owned. Sermons focused on charity, humility, and gratitude. Hymns echoed through cold air outside as congregations left their services. London's police worked through the holiday season, patrolling busy streets and crowded markets. Winter darkness brought an increase in petty theft. Officers walked beats slowly, their footsteps muffled by snow. Street lamps marked their paths. Constables carried lanterns in thick fog, guiding lost travelers and preventing accidents. In the West End, theaters offered special Christmas performances. Music halls and concert venues stayed busy through the season. Ticket sales showed that even in difficult times, entertainment remained important. Some shows offered reduced prices for working-class audiences. Others catered to wealthier patrons with full orchestras and professional actors. Despite its size, London was still learning to manage modern growth. Transportation systems strained under the pressure of winter crowds. Horses slipped on icy cobblestones. Tram lines froze. Workers spread sand on streets to make them passable. Water pipes froze in older buildings. Sanitation workers cleared snow with shovels and carts, moving piles to the sides of roads. Snow rarely lasted long. Coal smoke settled on it, turning white drifts gray and then black. Slush gathered near gutters. Boots and wheels splashed through muddy water. The beauty of winter faded quickly beneath the weight of the industrial city. Yet the memory of Christmas softened these realities. Families remembered the warmth of home, the small joys of the holiday, and the sense of community that appeared even in the harshest season. London, vast and crowded, found ways to feel connected. The season reminded residents that the city was more than factories and markets. It was a place of families, traditions, and shared experience. As December 1901 moved forward, Londoners continued their routines. They bought food, wrapped gifts, attended church, and prepared for celebrations. But something unusual lingered beneath the surface. News from the palace traveled slowly but steadily. The Queen was ill. Street conversations mentioned her condition. Newspapers printed cautious updates. People understood that history was changing. Even if their daily lives looked the same, the city did not stop for winter. And it did not stop for uncertainty. London kept moving through fog, smoke, and snow, toward Christmas Day, toward a new year, toward a new century, and toward a world that would soon look different from the one it had known for so long. While most of Britain prepared for Christmas in the usual way, decorating trees, arranging dinners, and sending cards, the royal holiday of 1901 unfolded behind the guarded walls of Osbourne House. The estate, located on the Isle of Wight, had become Queen Victoria's preferred retreat late in life. Unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, Osbourne was not a ceremonial residence. It was private, personal, and quiet. And in the winter of 1901, quiet was exactly what the royal household observed. Christmas at Osbourne House had once been a lively family tradition. When Prince Albert was alive, the holiday season included music, gifts, and large family gatherings. The royal couple decorated trees, hosted dinners, and encouraged their children to take part in festive traditions that were new to Britain in the mid-1800s. Prince Albert had introduced German-style Christmas customs to the royal household gift tables, decorated fir trees, and family celebrations. These traditions spread across the country as newspapers reported them, helping shape the modern British Christmas. But those memories belong to an earlier time. Albert had died in 1861, 40 years before this final Christmas of the Victorian age. After his death, the Queen withdrew from public life. Christmas never returned to its former brightness. At Osbourne, traditions continued, but they were subdued, marked by remembrance rather than celebration. In December 1901, the royal family gathered not for festivity, but for closeness. The Queen's children and grandchildren traveled quietly to be near her. The Prince of Wales, Princess Louise, Princess Helena, and other family members remained within the estate. Their presence was not announced publicly, but it did not go unnoticed. Servants, guards, and household staff understood the reason. The Queen was gravely ill. Inside Osbourne, Christmas proceeded according to long-established custom, though simplified. The main rooms of the house were decorated with garlands of ivy and holly. A few small fir trees were placed in drawing rooms, dressed with candles, ribbons, and handmade ornaments. Table gifts were prepared for members of the household staff as tradition required. The royal family had always given presents to servants at Christmas, small tokens of appreciation for a year of work. Even in 1901, that ritual continued, though without ceremony. Meals were served in private dining rooms rather than large banquet halls. The Queen no longer joined the family for long dinners. Her appetite was limited, and she spent much of her time resting. Physicians visited regularly. They monitored her pulse, strength, and ability to eat. Although details remained confidential, the family understood that this Christmas would not be like any in recent memory. Outside the main residence, Osbourne functioned like a small, self-contained community. There were stables, gardens, staff quarters, kitchens, and workshops. Servants carried out their duties quietly. Fires were kept warm through the night. Letters arrived from Buckingham Palace and government officers. Messages traveled by telegraph to keep ministers informed. Monarchy did not pause. Sickness required administration. The royal family moved carefully through the house. They avoided loud voices or sudden disturbances. Even children were guided to remain calm. Hospital corridors elsewhere in Britain were filled with noise and movement in winter months, but Osbourne felt still. Christmas carols were sung softly, not as performance, but as tradition. Photographs from earlier years show the Queen surrounded by her family during holiday gatherings. But in 1901, no such images were taken. Her appearance in public had already become rare, and her health no longer allowed for portrait sitting or formal photography. Newspapers relied on older images to accompany their reports. The Prince of Wales, waiting his entire life to become king, stayed close to his mother's side. His relationship with Victoria had been complicated for decades, but the final days of her life created a sense of duty rather than conflict. He reviewed daily medical reports, spoke with government officials, and prepared for the transition of power. His wife Alexandra visited the Queen daily. Other family members arrived by train or ship, entering the estate quietly to avoid public attention, even in the privacy of Osbourne. The royal household observed Christmas services. A small chapel stood on the grounds, and a clergyman conducted worship. Some family members attended while others prayed privately. Christmas in 1901 was not a time of music or bright ceremony. It was a time of reflection beyond the estate. The British public celebrated as usual, but news of the Queen's condition influenced the national mood. Many households held subdued gatherings. Letters and newspapers carried careful updates. The Queen was tired. The Queen was resting. The Queen remained under medical supervision. The meaning behind these statements was understood. The royal household made no public announcement on Christmas Day itself. Silence served as reassurance. If no urgent message appeared in newspapers, the public assumed that nothing had changed. But inside the walls of Osbourne, the family saw change every day. The Queen's strength continued to decline. It was not unusual for a monarch to experience great privacy and illness. Throughout history, the health of the sovereign was considered a matter of national stability. Rumors could unsettle markets, politics, and even diplomatic relations. For this reason, royal medical information was controlled with extreme caution. The Christmas of 1901 followed those rules. Only a small circle of advisors, physicians, and family understood how serious her condition truly was. Meals served to the royal family on Christmas Day followed tradition, though on a smaller scale. Roasted meats, vegetables, puddings, and pastries. Staff prepared everything with care, knowing the Queen would not join them at the table. In earlier years, Victoria had signed Christmas cards for close relatives and officials. But by 1901, she was too weak to write extensively. Much of her correspondence was dictated, short, and formal. There were no grand receptions, no musicians hired for evening entertainment, no large tree in a public hall. Instead, the final Victorian Christmas existed in quiet rooms, hushed footsteps, and private conversations. The Queen spent most of the day resting in bed or seated comfortably with the help of attendants. Doctors monitored her condition, adjusted treatments, and noted progress. Though they knew recovery was unlikely. Outside the estate walls, the Isle of Wight remained calm. Local residents had grown accustomed to the Queen's presence. Osbourne brought jobs and economic stability to the region. But that winter, visitors noticed increased activity near the residence. Extra carriages, additional guards, and the arrival of royal family members signaled that something was nearing its end. By the time Christmas passed, the Queen was entering her final weeks. January would bring heavier concern and soon national mourning. But during the holiday itself, the family remained in place, keeping traditions alive, not through celebration, but through presence. No public speeches marked the day. No official ceremonies were held. It was a holiday shaped by history and shadow, a moment where the past and future met quietly. The Victorian era had defined British identity for more than 6 decades, and now its final Christmas unfolded in silence, protected from public view, observed only by those inside the royal household. The queen had lived through revolutions in science, medicine, communication, and industry. She had seen her empire expand across continents. She had witnessed triumph and tragedy, war and reform, invention and discovery. But at the end, her world narrowed to quiet rooms, familiar faces, and the traditions she had once celebrated with her family in happier times. In the history of Christmas in Britain, 1901 stands as a turning point. It was the last Christmas of a Victorian world, a world shaped by certainty, ceremony, and the presence of a queen who had ruled longer than anyone before her. The new century would bring different monarchs, different customs, and different expectations. But in that final winter, the old world still held its place, if only for a few more weeks. For most families in Britain, Christmas was defined by the meal that brought everyone to the same table. It was a moment when the hardships of the year faded, at least for a day. In prosperous households, Christmas dinner became a display of abundance. In poorer homes, it was a careful effort to create warmth and tradition with whatever could be afforded. In both worlds, the table reflected not only food, but social history of Victorian Christmas meals were shaped by decades of cultural change. Before the 19th century, the holiday meal was simpler. Roast beef and ale were common, especially in rural areas. But as the century progressed, the Industrial Revolution changed diets. Rail transport delivered fresh meat, produce, and imported goods to city markets. Middle-class families gained access to foods once reserved for the wealthy. By 1901, many dishes now considered traditional at Christmas had become firmly established. In wealthy homes, preparation for Christmas dinner began days in advance. Large kitchens filled with servants worked in shifts. Cooks planned menus carefully, ordering ingredients from butchers, fishmongers, and grocers. Delivery boys arrived at back entrances carrying crates of vegetables, bags of flour, spices, cured meats, and wine. The scale of preparation depended on the size of the household and the number of guests expected. The centerpiece of the Victorian Christmas table was often roast turkey or goose. Turkey, originally a luxury meat, became popular among the middle class as farming and rail transport made it more affordable. Goose remained common in urban working-class neighborhoods, especially in London's East End, where goose clubs allowed families to pay small weekly installments throughout the year. By December, they could collect a prepared bird for Christmas dinner. Wealthy families had multiple courses: soups, fish, roasted meats, game, potatoes, root vegetables, breads, and puddings formed long meals served in orderly succession. Crystal glasses filled dining tables. China plates and silver cutlery reflected light from chandeliers. Meals lasted hours with brief pauses for conversation or music played in the adjacent drawing room. In many aristocratic or upper-middle-class homes, servants stood by the walls, ready to carry dishes in or remove plates on command. Desserts were a major part of Victorian holiday tradition. The most famous was Christmas pudding, a dense, rich dish made from suet, dried fruit, spices, and alcohol. It was often prepared weeks in advance and stored until Christmas Day before serving. It was heated and carried to the table, steaming, sometimes decorated with holly or doused in brandy and set alight. This dramatic presentation became part of the cultural memory of the holiday. Mince pies, once made with minced meat, now contained spiced fruit mixtures, trifles, layered custard, sponge cake, jelly, and cream. Almonds, figs, raisins, and dates filled decorative bowls. Imported oranges and grapes appeared on tables as symbols of luxury. Wine from Europe and fortified spirits from the Empire completed the meal. A wealthy Victorian Christmas dinner was not only a celebration of the holiday, it was a demonstration of social standing. The dining room served as a stage where families displayed prosperity, refinement, and adherence to tradition. But for working-class families, Christmas dinner looked very different. Most lived with limited income and rising costs. Industrial laborers often earned just enough to pay rent and buy basic food. Still, Christmas was a time when almost every household tried to prepare something special. The meal might not be large, but it carried meaning in many working homes. The Christmas meal centered on meat that had been saved for or purchased specifically for the day. Roast goose or duck was common in cities. In some places, beef or pork colored the table instead. Potatoes, cabbage, carrots, and onions filled plates. Bread stretched the meal further. Families cooked pies filled with scraps of meat and vegetables. Women prepared dishes slowly on small stovetops or coal ranges, working with whatever ingredients were available. For some families, the entire year's savings went toward a single Christmas dinner. Mothers and grandmothers planned carefully, buying flour, sugar, or spices in small quantities. If they could afford it, they made a pudding boiled slowly in cloth for hours, filling the house with the smell of spices and fruit. For children, the sweetness of a pudding or pie made Christmas memorable. Charity organizations played a major role during the season. Churches, unions, and philanthropic groups distributed food to the poor. Soup kitchens operated throughout December. Some factories provided small bonuses or donated meat. In several cities, large public dinners were held, offering hot meals to those who could not prepare their own. Reports from London newspapers described lines of families waiting in the cold for bread, meat, and pudding portions prepared by charitable societies in wealthy and middle-class districts. Servants often took leftover food to their own families or to neighbors in need. Even modest households shared what they could. The Victorian era emphasized charity as a moral duty, especially during Christmas. Despite hardship, many working-class families managed small touches of celebration. Children received oranges, nuts, or simple sweets. A loaf of sweet bread or a mincemeat pie could turn an ordinary day into a holiday. And even when ingredients were scarce, families found ways to create warmth. A candle burning on the table, a paper decoration, a prayer before the meal. The difference between the wealthy and the poor was stark. But Christmas brought a rare moment of shared experience. Across the country, families sat down to eat at roughly the same time. Whether surrounded by servants or seated in crowded rooms warmed by a single fire, the same ritual unfolded: a meal, a gathering, and the hope of a better year ahead. In middle-class homes, Christmas dinner blended aspiration and tradition. These families could not match aristocratic feasts, but they could afford turkey, plum pudding, and store-bought decorations. The expansion of railways made food distribution cheaper and more reliable. Farmers sent turkeys to London markets. Imported spices and fruit became widely available. New cookbooks, including those by Mrs. Isabella Beeton, instructed housewives on how to prepare multi-course meals. For many, Christmas became a time to demonstrate refinement and good management. After dinner, families played parlor games, read aloud, or sang carols. The meal was only part of the day. The time spent together mattered most in the royal household. Christmas dinner followed the pattern of the aristocracy. Though in simpler form during 1901, the Queen's health meant there was no grand banquet, yet the menu still reflected tradition: roast meats, puddings, pastries, fruit, and wine. Table gifts were exchanged quietly. Servants received small parcels of food, sweets, or coins, part of a long-standing custom of royal generosity. Across the empire, Christmas tables showed wide variation. In Canada, families cooked roasted turkey and plum pudding in snowy towns. In Australia, where December brought heat instead of frost, Christmas dinners sometimes included cold meats, seafood, and fresh fruit. British soldiers abroad received special rations when possible. Sailors in the Navy prepared Christmas puddings on ships using preserved ingredients supplied months earlier. Food connected people to home, tradition, and identity. Even those who were far away serving in the Boer War, stationed in India, or working in distant colonies, wrote letters describing Christmas meals and hoping for news of family gatherings in Britain. By 1901, the Christmas table had become a cultural landmark. Newspapers printed holiday recipes, shops advertised Christmas supplies, families, regardless of class, built rituals around the meal. It linked generations through memory. Many who lived through harsh winters remembered not the cold, but the moment the Christmas pudding was placed on the table. Children remembered oranges because fruit felt special. Workers remembered warmth because warmth was rare. The wealthy remembered abundance because abundance was expected. And yet, whether luxurious or modest, the holiday meal meant the same thing: a pause in the year, a gathering of family, and a reminder that traditions tied people together in a world entering a new century. The Victorian Christmas table represented continuity. Even as technology changed, even as the Queen's life neared its end, and even as society began shifting toward modernity, the simple act of sharing food remained unchanged. The table carried memory, history, and meaning. Across Britain in December 1901, as snow fell and chimneys smoked, families sat down to meals that reflected who they were and what they hoped for. For one day, the complexities of the era faded, replaced by something familiar and enduring, the comfort of a shared feast at Christmas by the final years of the Victorian era. Christmas had become the most anticipated holiday for British children. It was not always this way. In earlier centuries, Christmas was a quiet religious observance marked by simple meals and church services. Children did not expect gifts, and many families offered little more than a small cake or a shared meal. But over the course of the 19th century, traditions changed. Industrial growth, expanding trade, and the influence of the royal family transformed the holiday into a celebration of childhood and family life. Christmas trees were one of the most visible symbols of that transformation. The tradition did not originate in Britain. It came from German customs where decorated trees were part of seasonal celebrations. When Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, introduced the Christmas tree to the royal household in the 1840s, newspapers published illustrations of the royal family gathered around a decorated fir. The image spread quickly. Middle-class families began placing trees in their parlors, decorating them with candles, sweets, ribbons, fruit, and handmade ornaments. By 1901, even working-class families often found a way to obtain a small tree, or in some cases, a pine branch hung on a wall as a symbol of the season. Christmas crackers also became part of holiday tradition during the Victorian age. Invented in the 1840s by London confectioner Tom Smith, crackers began as wrapped sweets with small paper messages. Later, Smith added a strip that produced a snapping sound when pulled apart. Inside each cracker were small toys, paper hats, or jokes. By the turn of the century, crackers were a standard feature of Christmas dinner across Britain. Families pulled them before the meal, and children laughed as paper crowns slipped over their heads. Even those with little money might manage a few homemade crackers using newspaper and string. Christmas cards also gained widespread popularity in the second half of the 19th century. Improvements in printing technology and the penny postage system made sending cards affordable. Early cards featured winter scenes, birds, flowers, and sentimental sayings. Some included humor, while others carried messages of charity or goodwill. By 1901, millions of cards were printed and delivered through the British postal system. Children helped choose cards for relatives and friends. The arrival of the postman in December became a small daily excitement. Gift-giving changed as well. In earlier generations, gifts were small and practical gloves, scarves, or simple toys. But the rise of mass production made goods cheaper and more varied. Toy shops appeared in major cities and department stores created elaborate Christmas displays. Windows filled with dolls, tin soldiers, wooden trains, puzzles, spinning tops, and books. Some toys were imported from Germany, where skilled craftspeople produced high-quality dolls and mechanical toys. For many children, seeing these displays was a holiday event in itself. Not all toys were purchased. Many parents made gifts at home. Mothers sewed dolls, knitted gloves, or mended clothing to create something special. Fathers carved wooden toys or built small carts and whistles. Working-class children often valued these handmade gifts as much as any store-bought item. Small presents like an orange, a sugar plum, a paper kite, a bag of nuts could make Christmas memorable. Stockings became a familiar custom. Children hung socks or small bags at the end of their beds or by the mantelpiece. On Christmas morning, they searched eagerly for treats. A few sweets, a toy, or a coin felt magical. For those who lived in crowded tenement buildings or rural cottages, the moment carried simple joy. The discovery of even the smallest gift made the holiday special. The idea of Santa Claus or Father Christmas also changed during the Victorian era. Before the 19th century, Father Christmas symbolized seasonal good cheer rather than gift delivery. But influences from European and American traditions reshaped him into a bringer of presents. Illustrations appeared in books and cards, showing a kindly old man with a white beard. Department stores sometimes hired men to dress as Father Christmas for children's visits. The character grew more familiar each year. By 1901, many British children believed that Father Christmas came while they slept, delivering gifts and filling stockings, games and activities filled. Christmas Day, families played parlor games such as charades, blind man's buff, and musical chairs. Children recited poems or sang carols. Many homes had pianos or harmoniums, and music became part of the holiday. In wealthier households, children learned Christmas songs throughout the season, performing them for parents and guests. Church attendance remained central to the holiday. Children dressed in their best clothing and walked with families to services. Churches decorated altars with holly and evergreen branches. Choirs performed hymns. For children, the music and candle lights created a sense of wonder. Christmas was both a religious observance and a time of family celebration. School holidays extended through late December, giving children a break from long classroom hours. Victorian education was strict and disciplined with memorization, recitation, and formal instruction. The holiday offered freedom from routine. For a few days, children played outdoors, visited friends, or helped with household preparations. In wealthier homes, children sometimes received larger gifts such as bicycles, books, fine dolls, or music instruments. Middle-class families purchased factory-made toys that were more affordable than in previous decades. The availability of metal workshops, wood mills, and textile factories made toys more accessible. By contrast, children in poor families received fewer gifts, but even small gestures mattered. A shared toy, a small book, or a new set of pencils brought happiness. Charity organizations recognized the importance of Christmas for children. Orphanages and workhouses prepared special meals. Volunteers delivered toys and clothing to poor families. Soup kitchens served hot meals to children who would otherwise have gone hungry. Reports from newspapers described children lining up for gifts donated by community groups. Even in difficult circumstances, the season inspired acts of kindness. The Victorian idea of childhood changed during the century. Earlier generations viewed children as small adults expected to work and obey without question. But by the 1800s, new ideas emerged. Education laws, child labor reforms, and social change slowly shifted attitudes. Christmas became more focused on children, not only as workers, but as individuals deserving of joy. The holiday helped define the modern concept of childhood itself, a time of learning, innocence, and play. Christmas decorations also became more common. Families hung paper chains, greenery, and candles. Some homes displayed small nativity scenes. Children crafted decorations from card and colored paper. Middle-class households purchased ornaments from shops. The sight of glowing candles on Christmas trees became one of the most beautiful and dangerous traditions of the era. Adults watched constantly to prevent fire. By the early 1900s, a few electric tree lights appeared, but they were rare and expensive. The season also brought community events. Villages held concerts and recitals. Town squares displayed small trees or lanterns. In large cities, music halls and theaters offered holiday shows. Some families saved all year to buy tickets for a Christmas pantomime lively stage production filled with comedy, music, and fairy tale characters. Children watched wide-eyed as colorful costumes and magical sets transformed the stage. Literature shaped childhood celebration as well. Stories such as Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol influenced public views of generosity and family unity. The tale of Ebenezer Scrooge, published in 1843, emphasized kindness and charity. The book's message spread across Britain, reinforcing the idea that Christmas should soften hearts and inspire compassion, especially toward children. Adaptations appeared in theaters, magazines, and schools. By 1901, Dickens's story was firmly part of the cultural fabric of the season. In newspapers, articles described royal holiday traditions influencing how families imagined their own celebrations. When the public saw illustrations of the royal children gathered around trees, they adopted similar customs. Department stores imitated royal gift tables in their window displays. Christmas traditions spread rapidly as printing, advertising, and rail travel connected people across the country. Yet the differences between rich and poor remained clear. Wealthy children opened many gifts, attended parties, and traveled to relatives' estates. Poor children shared simple meals and homemade toys. Still, the emotional core of the holiday was similar: families, hope, and the excitement of something special waiting on Christmas morning. Some traditions carried forward from earlier centuries. Mummers' plays, short folk performances survived in certain regions. Carolers walked from house to house, singing in exchange for coins or food. Children sometimes followed them singing simple songs in small groups. In rural areas, sleigh rides and outdoor games filled the day when weather allowed. Across the British Empire, colonial families blended British customs with local traditions. Children in Canada experienced snowy holidays similar to Britain. In Australia, where December brought summer heat, Christmas trees and stockings remained, but children played outdoors in warm weather. On ships at sea, sailors prepared holiday puddings for the youngest on board. British officers in India organized small gatherings for their families, often joined by local staff who adopted parts of the celebration. What defined Victorian Christmas was not only food or decoration, but memory and continuity. Each tradition, trees, crackers, cards, stockings, pudding, told a story of how culture evolved. These customs traveled from royal palaces to middle-class parlors, and from there into modest homes. Children carried the memories forward, shaping how the next generation viewed the holiday. As the winter of 1901 passed, children across Britain experienced Christmas in familiar ways. They woke early, searched for stockings, ran to the tree, and gathered with family for meals. Their world felt unchanged, even if adults sensed that history was moving. For children, the final Victorian Christmas was simply Christmas, cold weather, warm fires, laughter, and the excitement of toys and treats. The century ahead would transform childhood yet again. New inventions, new technologies, and new ideas would reshape everyday life. But the traditions that formed in the Victorian era survived. They crossed oceans, entered new cultures, and became global. In December 1901, children did not know they were part of the last Victorian Christmas. They simply lived the moment surrounded by songs, stories, and family. And in that quiet, joyful simplicity, the heart of the holiday remained unchanged. Winter in 1901, Britain was shaped by coal. It powered factories, warmed homes, fueled steam engines, lit lamps, and cooked meals. Every part of daily life depended on it. When temperatures dropped and frost formed on rooftops, the importance of coal became even clearer. For wealthy families, coal arrived in regular deliveries to large cellars beneath their homes. But for the working poor, coal was often expensive, rationed, or bought in small bags when wages allowed. The ability to stay warm through winter depended not on tradition or celebration, but on survival in cities such as London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Winter air carried the smell of coal smoke. Thousands of chimneys exhaled constantly. When fog settled, smoke mixed with moisture, creating thick haze that clung to the streets. People walked with scarves around their faces. Gas lamps glowed as faint halos in the mist. Horse-drawn carts disappeared only a few meters ahead. Factories did not pause for cold weather. Industrial machines ran through December and January, powered by steam engines that burned coal day and night. Textile mills, ironworks, printing presses, and shipyards followed strict schedules. For many workers, Christmas was a single day off before the next shift began. Some industries continued even on holidays, especially those tied to transportation and essential services. Workers left their homes long before daylight. In winter, most traveled to their jobs in darkness and returned in darkness. Streets were slippery with ice or slush, and accidents were common. The poorest walked because they could not afford fares. Others rode trams, omnibuses, or commuter trains. They crowded into carriages still cold from the night air, their breath turning to mist inside. For the working poor, wages mattered more than the holiday season. A missed day of work could mean less food or less fuel. Many families budgeted carefully, buying coal in small amounts, sometimes one shovelful at a time from a local shop. When coal ran out, households burned scraps of wood, paper, or anything that produced heat. In a winter storm, when supply wagons could not move easily, coal shortages affected entire neighborhoods. Inside homes, a single fireplace was often the only source of warmth. Families gathered close to it, leaving bedrooms unheated, windows iced over at night, water buckets froze indoors, children slept in layers of clothing to keep warm. Even in middle-class houses, unused rooms were closed to conserve heat. Victorian clothing, heavy wool garments, shawls, gloves, and scarves served as insulation against the cold. Health was a constant concern. Cold homes contributed to illness, especially among children and the elderly. Pneumonia, influenza, and bronchitis spread easily in winter months. Doctors reported high cases in crowded neighborhoods where ventilation was poor. Coal smoke irritated lungs and damp air weakened immune systems. Hospitals filled more quickly in winter while many families hesitated to seek treatment due to cost. Yet London and other major cities continued to grow. Factories provided work for thousands who had moved from rural areas. Winter brought no pause in production. Machines required constant maintenance. Workers operated looms, presses, and furnaces under strict supervision. An accident or injury could end employment, and with it, the ability to pay rent or buy food. For mothers working in factories, winter created additional challenges. They left children with relatives or older siblings. Some children worked themselves carrying coal, assisting in workshops, or selling goods on the streets. Child labor laws had improved by 1901, but many families still relied on children's earnings. Boys sold newspapers, shoeshine services, or matches. Girls rolled tobacco, stitched garments, or helped in bakeries. In cold weather, these tasks became more difficult, but necessity left little choice. Transportation was essential to the winter economy. Steam trains carried coal from mining regions across the country. Newcastle, South Wales, and the Midlands supplied most industrial cities. Railway workers labored outdoors in freezing temperatures, loading and unloading heavy carts. Snow and ice slowed travel, but rail schedules continued. Telegraph lines ensured communication between stations, allowing trains to operate with precision even in weather that made roads impassable. Horse-drawn carts delivered coal to homes and businesses. Drivers hauled sacks on their backs or tipped carts to empty loads. Coal dust stained clothing and settled on snow, turning it gray and then black. In working-class streets, children collected small fallen pieces from the road, filling buckets with crumbs of coal to warm their homes for an hour or two. Christmas offered brief relief. Charities organized coal distribution to poor families. Churches raised money for coal clubs. Small funds used to buy fuel for those in need. In some neighborhoods, local shopkeepers allowed families to delay payment until after the holiday. These acts of kindness did not erase hardship, but they made the cold more bearable. Despite the difficulties of winter, working-class families created their own traditions. Some saved a small portion of wages to buy extra food for Christmas dinner. Others exchanged handmade gifts or shared a single candle to brighten the room. Children played outside, even in the cold, sliding on frozen puddles or building snow shapes in alleyways. The season brought moments of joy amid struggle. Factories often recognized Christmas with small gestures. Some provided a meal in the lunchroom or gave leftover materials that workers could use at home. In textile mills, women collected scraps of fabric to patch clothing. In printing shops, workers brought home discarded paper for children to draw on. In coal yards, men sometimes received a small bundle of fuel to carry back to their families in wealthier districts. The contrast was striking. Large town houses had multiple fireplaces, well-stocked kitchens, and paid staff to maintain comfort. Carriages transported families to church services, concerts, and dinners. Gaslight illuminated drawing rooms. Children unwrapped toys beside warm fires. The cold existed outside their windows, not inside their homes. This contrast shaped public debate throughout the late Victorian period. Politicians, journalists, and reformers argued about housing conditions, wages, and safety laws. Winter made inequality visible. Reports from social investigators described families sleeping in damp cellars, sharing beds, or living in overcrowded rooms. Newspapers printed stories of charity events, encouraging donations. Slowly improvements, public housing projects, better wages. Social support, but change moved gradually. The labor movement gained strength at the turn of the century. Workers organized to demand safer conditions and fairer pay. Winter highlighted the necessity of stable work and basic comfort. Strikes and protests appeared in some industries, though many workers feared losing their jobs. By 1901, labor rights remained limited, but momentum was building for future reform. Despite hardship, resilience defined working-class communities. Neighbors shared food, coal, and clothing when possible. Women gathered to sew or mend garments together. Men helped repair broken stoves or window frames. In tenement buildings, families supported each other through illness. In mining towns and industrial districts, winter survival depended not only on wages, but on cooperation. Travelers visiting Britain in winter often commented on the sight of smoke rising endlessly from chimneys, the crowded streets of workers in heavy coats, and the constant movement of trains and carts. The country ran on industry, and industry ran on coal. By the end of December 1901, the rhythms of work continued unchanged, while wealthier families closed parlors for Christmas celebrations. The factories did not fall silent. The new century was approaching, and Britain remained the largest industrial power in the world. The working class carried that weight every day. Even in the deepest months of winter, Christmas came and went, offering a brief moment of rest before labor resumed. Fires burned low in small hearths. Children slept in narrow beds, dreaming beneath patched blankets. Outside, the streets stayed dark and cold, lit only by gas lamps and the faint glow of coal fires behind shuttered windows. The Victorian era was ending, but the difficulties of winter remained. Coal kept the country alive, powering machines, warming homes, and filling the air with smoke. It was the backbone of industry and the measure of survival. For many families, the season was not defined by feasts or decorations, but by the struggle to stay warm and fed through the darkest weeks of the year. By the end of 1901, the British Empire stretched across continents, climates, and cultures. It included dominions, colonies, protectorates, and territories on nearly every side of the globe. More than 400 million people lived under the British Crown. Because of this reach, Christmas in 1901 was not only a British holiday. It had become, in many places, a global observance experienced differently in each land, shaped by weather, culture, and local tradition. In Canada, Christmas looked closest to the celebration in Britain. Snow-covered towns and countryside, rivers and lakes froze. Families traveled by horse-drawn sleigh along icy roads wrapped in thick coats and blankets. Evergreen forests provided natural Christmas trees, which families cut and decorated with candles, fruit, and ribbons. In cities such as Toronto and Montreal, churches held crowded services, and choirs sang hymns familiar to British ears. Families prepared large winter meals, roasted meats, puddings, pastries, and sweets. Children opened stockings or small gifts on Christmas morning. In rural farming communities, the season included barn dances, community gatherings, and sleigh rides under clear winter skies. Newspapers published holiday stories, advice for cooking, and reports of charity events for the poor. For Canadians, Christmas carried both British tradition and a distinctly North American winter spirit. Australia experienced the same holiday in the opposite season. December brought heat, long days, and bright sunlight. Christmas dinner sometimes took place outdoors in gardens or on wide verandas. Roast meats remained popular, but many families preferred cold dishes, ham, poultry, seafood, and salads. Imported dried fruit was used to make puddings, while fresh seasonal produce offered an alternative to the heavy meals eaten in Britain. Children played games in warm weather, raced along beaches, and swam in the ocean. Carols were sung indoors at night when the air grew cooler. Churches held evening services with open windows to let in the breeze. Although the holiday borrowed its structure from Britain, it did not resemble a winter festival. Instead, Australians created their own version, familiar songs and symbols in a summer landscape. In New Zealand, Christmas shared elements of both British and Australian tradition. Some families decorated pine branches or native plants when trees were not available. Children woke early to open gifts just as they did in Britain. Community events filled town squares with bands playing carols and families gathering outdoors. In some places, Maori communities adopted parts of the holiday, blending Christian observance with traditional cultural practices. Christmas in India reflected the complexity of empire. India was home to many religions and cultures, and most of the population did not observe Christmas. But Christian communities, especially in cities and port regions, marked the holiday with devotion. British officials, soldiers, and families held services in churches decorated with flowers and greenery. Instead of holly and pine, buildings were adorned with palm leaves, jasmine, and local plants. Christmas dinners included both familiar British dishes and local influences. Spices, fruits, and regional ingredients shaped the meal. Bakeries in cities such as Kolkata and Bombay sold fruitcakes and sweetbreads for the season. Mission schools held celebrations for children, offering small gifts or treats. For the British in India, Christmas also carried a sense of distance, a reminder of home, celebrated beneath unfamiliar skies. In Africa, the picture varied widely. In regions of British settlement, such as parts of South Africa and Eastern Africa, Christmas resembled the holiday in warmer climates. Families attended church services, shared meals, and exchanged small gifts. In missionary communities, Christmas was a major event, including choirs, outdoor gatherings, and special meals for children. British military outposts held modest celebrations, serving preserved meat, tinned vegetables, and puddings made from long-stored ingredients. South Africa in particular marked Christmas during the ongoing Boer War. British soldiers far from home received special rations when possible. Some were given plum puddings or small parcels sent by families. Letters exchanged through military post carried holiday greetings across great distance. Troops sometimes organized simple games or concerts to lift spirits, even in difficult conditions. The war did not stop for the holiday, but it did not erase it either. Across the Caribbean, Christmas carried its own distinct identity. In colonies such as Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, churches held lively services filled with music. Families shared seasonal dishes made from local ingredients, tropical fruits, spiced meats, and rum cakes. Parades, dances, and market celebrations filled some towns. The warm climate shaped the holiday into a vibrant outdoor festival rather than a winter gathering. In smaller Pacific territories where missionary influence had spread, Christmas services marked the season. British officials and colonial workers prepared meals with whatever supplies were available. Ships that docked in island harbors brought mail, gifts, and preserved goods. Even in remote locations, the holiday offered a link to home and tradition. The global nature of Christmas in 1901 reflected the structure of empire. Railways, steamships, and telegraph lines connected distant lands. Newspapers carried stories of holiday celebrations from one colony to another. People saw illustrations and advertisements that showed how Christmas was observed in different climates. The holiday adapted to local conditions, yet remained recognizable. Not everyone celebrated. In many parts of the empire, Christmas passed like any other day. In regions of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, traditional festivals and religious observances followed their own calendars. Farmers continued their work. Merchants opened shops. For much of the world, December 25th was not a holiday. The spread of Christmas was gradual, influenced by missionaries, trade, and cultural exchange. For the British abroad, Christmas could be a moment of homesickness. Letters carried memories of snow, carols, and gatherings far away. Officers and administrators held small dinners with colleagues. Some attempted to create familiar scenes using imported decorations or preserved treats. Others accepted the differences, observing Christmas beneath palm trees or in desert heat. Naval ships of the Royal Navy observed Christmas at sea. Crews decorated mess halls, sang hymns, and shared special rations. Stewards prepared plum puddings from stored ingredients. In logbooks, officers recorded the holiday with simple notations. Christmas Day, crew in good spirits for sailors who had been away from Britain for months. The day offered a break from routine. On long sea voyages, passengers on steamships celebrated together. They shared meals, held small concerts, and exchanged greetings. Some ships carried mail that arrived in time for Christmas morning, bringing news from home. Others reached foreign ports where passengers saw unfamiliar Christmas customs or none at all. As telegraph networks expanded, families separated by oceans could send short messages. Christmas greetings crossed continents in minutes, though at high cost. Newspapers printed reports of these communications, noting how modern technology connected distant parts of the empire. The idea that Christmas was becoming global appeared in articles and speeches. It was a holiday traveling along the same routes as trade, migration, and infrastructure. Yet even in its spread, the holiday changed meaning. In Britain, Christmas had become a family tradition centered on children, meals, and customs. In colonies, it often served as a marker of British identity, a reminder of home rather than a reflection of local culture. Over time, some customs blended, others remained separate. The result was a patchwork of traditions united by date, not by uniformity. By December 1901, the last Christmas of the Victorian era, the world was already shifting. The new century promised technological advances, political changes, and emerging nations. The empire would not remain unchanged. But the holiday carried by ships and settlers, missionaries and merchants had rooted itself deeply in many places. Across Canada, snow muffled the sound of sleigh bells. In Australia, warm winds carried the scent of eucalyptus. In India, palm leaves decorated churches filled with candlelight. In the Caribbean, drummers played festive rhythms beneath night skies. In South Africa, soldiers shared tins of pudding under canvas tents. And on ships at sea, sailors passed plates of hardtack and sweetened bread, thinking of families far away. Christmas in 1901 revealed not only the extent of the empire, but the resilience of tradition. People brought familiar rituals into unfamiliar lands. They adapted them to climate, culture, and circumstance. The holiday survived distance, war, and change. A century earlier, few could have imagined such a global Christmas. But by the time Queen Victoria spent her final holiday at Osbourne House, Christmas had become something larger than a single nation. A shared moment across many different parts of the world, shaped by connection, memory, and the quiet hope that a new year would bring better days. While families across Britain prepared for Christmas in 1901, another reality continued far from home. Thousands of British soldiers, officers, nurses, and support workers were serving in South Africa, fighting in the Boer War. The conflict had begun in 1899 and would not end until mid-1902 during that winter. It remained a constant presence in newspapers and conversation. Even as Christmas carols were sung and holiday meals were served, the war shaped the national mood. The Boer War was unlike earlier conflicts Britain had faced. Instead of battles between traditional armies, it involved mobile groups of Boer commandos, rural terrain, and long stretches of waiting. Soldiers traveled across open plains, dry farmland, and rocky hills. Their opponents knew the land well and used it to their advantage. British troops, many of them young and far from home, lived in camps exposed to harsh weather conditions, disease, and limited supplies. By Christmas 1901, more than 200,000 British soldiers were serving in South Africa. Many had spent months away from their families. Letters took weeks to arrive. Telegraph lines allowed for short official messages, but personal communication still depended on ships carrying mail across oceans. For soldiers, Christmas brought reminders of what they were missing: home, warmth, family, and familiar traditions. Military leaders tried to keep the holiday from passing unnoticed. In many camps, officers arranged small celebrations. When supply allowed, soldiers received better rations for the day. Some units opened tins of preserved meat and pudding that had been shipped from Britain. Others held makeshift concerts with men singing or playing instruments they carried with them. A few regiments organized games or friendly competitions to lift spirits. Even a moment of rest felt valuable. But the environment was never far from danger. Fighting continued in parts of the country. Patrols were sent out on Christmas Day. Some soldiers slept with rifles near their tents. Others traveled by horseback across dusty plains, searching for Boer fighters who rarely engaged in direct battles. The war moved slowly, shaped by attrition and endurance. For the families in Britain, the war created a quiet divide in the holiday season. Married women waited for news from husbands and sons. Mothers and fathers saved newspaper clippings. Children asked when their fathers would return. When letters arrived, they were read and reread. If no letter came, families hoped for the next ship, the next delivery, the next chance. Newspapers published stories of soldiers celebrating Christmas abroad. They described improvised dinners, small trees decorated with paper, and makeshift chapels where hymns were sung. These articles provided comfort to families, offering a sense that their loved ones were not forgotten. But they also reminded readers that the war continued even as Britain prepared for a new century. Not all reports were cheerful. Casualty lists appeared regularly in the press. Hospitals in South Africa treated men for wounds, fever, typhoid, and dysentery. Disease affected more soldiers than bullets. Winter in Britain meant summer in South Africa, and heat added to the difficulty of moving, working, and fighting. Many soldiers spent Christmas recovering in field hospitals or transport ships. Across the empire, colonial forces served alongside British troops. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand sent volunteers, many of them young men who had never traveled so far from home. Christmas for them meant tents pitched in dry grasslands, letters from distant families, and shared meals cooked in iron pots over open fires. Their involvement connected the empire's dominions to the war, reinforcing the idea of global commitment. For Boer families, Christmas passed under the shadow of conflict as well. Farms were destroyed, livestock seized, and civilians displaced. Women and children lived in concentration camps established by British authorities. Disease spread quickly in overcrowded tents. Winter or summer, the camps were harsh. Newspapers in Britain mentioned these conditions, but public opinion was divided. Some supported the war as a necessary part of imperial expansion. Others criticized the treatment of civilians and the length of the conflict. Political debate continued in Parliament. The government promised that victory was close, but months passed with slow progress. Christmas 1901 did not bring resolution. As Britain celebrated quietly at home, the contrast between domestic comfort and military hardship was unmistakable. In warm parlors, families sang hymns and exchanged gifts. On the front, soldiers sat on the ground, eating simple meals, sharing stories, or watching distant fires burn on the horizon. The distance between those two worlds was measured not only in miles, but in memory. For many soldiers, Christmas became a day of reflection. Some carried small Bibles or letters from loved ones. Others thought of walks through snowy streets, warm kitchens, or the sound of church bells. Officers recorded brief notes in diaries. A few wrote letters describing Christmas in the field, saving them to mail when transport became available. When news of Queen Victoria's failing health reached South Africa, the emotional weight increased. She had been the symbol of their loyalty present on coins, medals, and military insignia. If she died, many soldiers knew they would mark the moment far from home. Some units prepared black armbands in anticipation. Officers discussed how to conduct ceremonies in remote camps when the news arrived. The war also affected Christmas celebrations back in Britain. Fundraising events collected money for wounded soldiers and their families. Churches organized holiday drives to send care packages overseas. Children signed cards that were mailed to regiments. Women knitted socks, scarves, and gloves to send through military supply lines. The idea that Christmas should include charity gained strength during these years. Technology allowed quicker communication than in earlier wars. Telegraph lines transmitted official messages. Newspapers printed dispatches almost daily. But personal letters still defined emotional connection. A single letter could sustain a soldier's morale for weeks. Many kept folded envelopes in their pockets, reading them whenever the opportunity arose. When letters arrived home, they offered glimpses of military life. The dust, the heat, the exhaustion, and sometimes the humor. Soldiers described eating rations that seemed unappealing but welcome. They wrote about sleeping outdoors, wearing the same clothes for weeks, and missing the smell of rain or the taste of fresh bread. For their families, these words carried reassurance, but also sorrow. As December 1901 ended, British commanders continued their strategy of capturing Boer fighters, restricting supplies, and dismantling resistance. The war still had months left. Christmas passed, but the conflict did not. Troops prepared for the next patrol, the next march, the next engagement. For the Empire, the Boer War became a lesson in the challenges of modern conflict. It was not a short, glorious campaign. It required endurance, logistics, and adaptation. Soldiers learned new tactics and built makeshift railways to move supplies. They used telegraphs, observation balloons, and scouting patrols. The war marked a transition to 20th century warfare, shaped by technology and strategy rather than grand battlefield charges. Back in Britain, the holiday season faded into the new year. Families folded away decorations and returned to ordinary life. But the war followed them. New casualty lists appeared. More letters arrived. Newspapers printed photographs of soldiers standing beside tents, rifles slung over their shoulders. Some families received the letters they feared most. Official notices of deaths in battle, accidents, or disease. Those who mourned did so quietly, often without public ceremony. Military burials took place overseas. Graves lay far from home, marked with simple stones or wooden crosses. And yet, even with loss and distance, hope remained. Many believed the war would soon end. Government leaders promised victory. Soldiers expected to return home in the coming year. The new century had begun, and people wanted closure. Christmas had offered a brief moment of comfort, but it could not remove the reality of war. It continued in the background of daily life, shaping families, politics, and public emotion. The contrast between celebration and conflict defined the season. For soldiers in South Africa, Christmas 1901 would be remembered as a day that felt both familiar and distant. A holiday without snow, without trees, without the warmth of family. A day marked by small gestures, a shared pudding, a letter from home, a quiet song after nightfall for Britain. It was a reminder that even in times of tradition and festivity, history moved forward, shaped not only by celebrations, but by the sacrifices happening far away. By December 1901, newspapers had become one of the most powerful forces in Britain. In earlier centuries, news traveled slowly. People learned of royal events, wars, or political changes through word of mouth, letters, and occasional broadsheets. But in the final year of the Victorian age, information spread quickly. Printing technology, national railway networks, and telegraph lines had transformed the modern press into something new. A daily voice that shaped public opinion. More than 200 newspapers circulated across Britain. Large national papers such as The Times, The Daily Telegraph, and The Morning Post provided political coverage, foreign affairs, and government reports. Regional newspapers printed local stories, market prices, and railway schedules. Penny papers offered simple language, illustrations, and sensational headlines for working-class readers. Every social class, from the wealthy to factory, accessed printed news. The technology behind newspapers had changed dramatically since the early 1800s. Presses replaced manual printing, allowing thousands of copies per hour. Typesetting improved. Paper became cheaper. In 1901, a newspaper printed in London could be transported by train and distributed across the nation. The same day, people bought papers at street corners, railway stations, and markets. Newsboys called out headlines to attract buyers. This constant circulation made the press a daily presence in public life. Telegraph lines added speed to reporting. Messages that once took days or weeks to travel by ship or mail could now reach London within hours. Governments used telegraphs for official communication. Newspaper offices connected directly to telegraph rooms. Reporters in distant countries sent short messages summarizing battles, elections, or natural disasters. Newspapers rewrote these telegrams into full articles for the next morning's edition. The Boer War made the telegraph essential. Correspondents in South Africa sent urgent updates to London. Even brief messages, troops advanced, reinforcements arrived. Casualties reported reached the British public the next day. Because of this speed, the war became one of the first conflicts followed almost in real time. Families waited for news from the front. Politicians read battlefield reports before making statements. Newspapers gained influence with every dispatch printed in December 1901. The press focused on three major subjects: the war, politics, and the health of Queen Victoria. Because the palace released limited information, newspapers filled pages with speculation. Journalists described the Queen's absences, her reduced public appearances, and rumors of medical decline. Some papers remained respectful and cautious. Others printed dramatic headlines, knowing that public curiosity increased sales. For many readers, newspapers served as both information and entertainment. Popular papers published serialized stories, human interest articles, and illustrations. Advertisements filled entire pages: soap, medicines, bicycles, rail travel, and new inventions. The growth of consumer culture appeared clearly in print. Even at Christmas, newspapers displayed large holiday advertisements for toys, clothing, and seasonal goods. Shops competed for attention, promising low prices and new items imported from abroad. The press also shaped political debate. Commentators criticized government spending, military strategy, and labor conditions. Others defended imperial policy, arguing that the war in South Africa protected Britain's global interests. Letters to the editor allowed citizens to express opinions. Through print, ordinary voices entered national conversation. Journalism itself was changing. More reporters were hired to gather first-hand information. Some traveled abroad as war correspondents. Others investigated city conditions, visiting factories, tenements, and workhouses. Their reports influenced public understanding of poverty, health, and education. Readers learned about living conditions in East London, coal shortages in industrial towns, and strikes in major factories. The press documented social problems that had been hidden or ignored. Photography was another transformation. By 1901, newspapers could reproduce images using half-tone printing. Although photographs were small and grainy by modern standards, they had powerful impact. Readers saw images of soldiers standing beside tents in South Africa, portraits of political leaders and views of city streets. Photographs made distant places feel closer and more real. In addition to domestic news, papers reported events from around the world. Steamship lines and telegraph cables connected Britain to Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Reports described political changes, scientific discoveries, and international trade. The British public developed a broader awareness of global affairs. Newspapers contributed to a sense of connection between colonies, dominions, and the mother country. Rumors spread as quickly as verified facts. In crowded cities, people discussed printed stories on trams, in pubs, and at work. A headline could change public mood within hours. Some newspapers exaggerated information to attract attention. Others issued corrections in later editions. Readers learned to compare multiple sources, forming opinions based on what they trusted. Christmas editions were among the most popular of the year. Papers printed seasonal stories, poems, and illustrations. Some offered charity appeals encouraging donations for the poor. Others published articles describing how Christmas was celebrated in other parts of the empire. Through print, readers encountered places they would never visit: India, Australia, Canada, South Africa, turning the holiday into a shared imperial experience. Newspapers also served a practical role during winter. They published weather reports, rail schedules, and shipping times. For travelers, these details mattered. Snow or fog could delay trains. Harbors could close due to storms. Families planning Christmas trips relied on newspaper updates. Even advertisements for coal suppliers and winter clothing reflected seasonal needs. Telegrams played a separate but related role, while newspapers informed the public. Telegrams connected individuals. Businesses used telegrams to send orders or confirm deliveries. Families used them to send urgent messages across the country. During Christmas, telegraph offices processed thousands of holiday greetings. Short messages were sent from cities to small villages and from Britain to colonies abroad. Though expensive, telegrams represented modern communication: quick, reliable, and direct. Government officials relied on the telegraph as well. Colonial administrators reported updates to London. Military officers sent coded messages. Diplomats exchanged instructions. With telegraph technology, decisions could be made faster, though not always more accurately. The speed of information sometimes led to mistakes, misunderstandings, or conflicting reports printed in the press because the Queen's health remained uncertain. Telegrams between royal residences carried constant updates. Prince Edward, other members of the royal family, and senior advisors communicated through telegraph rooms staffed at all hours. When the Queen's condition worsened in January, telegraphs delivered the news across Britain and the Empire. Newspaper presses prepared special editions within hours. In December 1901, the public could feel change happening. The press represented modern communication, faster, louder, and harder to ignore. Old forms of authority began to share space with printed opinion. The power of newspapers increased, and their influence reached every level of society. Factories used advertisements to hire workers. Shopkeepers depended on print to sell goods. Politicians watched the press closely, knowing public support could shift with a single headline. The monarchy, once distant and mysterious, entered daily conversation because newspapers brought palace news into ordinary homes. The reach of the press also reflected literacy. By 1901, education reforms and compulsory schooling had increased reading ability across the country. More people could read newspapers than ever before. Even those who could not read often heard articles repeated aloud by friends or family. Newsboys shouted headlines, spreading information verbally through crowded streets. For 1 penny, a reader could access the world, a new ability in human history. Information no longer belonged only to the wealthy or educated. It became a public resource. Christmas 1901 showed how deeply newspapers had become part of everyday life. They shaped conversation at dinner tables, workplaces, and railway stations. They reported the war, the weather, the Queen, and the holiday. They connected cities to small towns, factories to markets, and Britain to distant colonies. The Victorian era had begun without railways, telegraphs, or mass printing. It ended with modern communication that moved faster than previous generations imagined. In the quiet winter streets of 1901, as gas lamps glowed through fog and snow, people opened newspapers and saw not only the year's final holiday, but a changing world. A new century was arriving. Information traveled by cable instead of sailing ship. Public voices grew louder. Newspapers and telegrams became the threads binding the empire together, shaping modern identity, opinion, and awareness. In the last Victorian Christmas, modern media had already taken its place. The world felt bigger, more connected, and more informed than ever before. Christmas in 1901 was not defined only by food, decorations, or family gatherings. It was also shaped by sound. In towns and cities across Britain, music filled streets, churches, and public squares. Carols, hymns, and the ringing of church bells created a familiar soundscape that marked the holiday season. Even in a year marked by war and uncertainty, these sounds carried comfort and tradition. Christmas carols had a long history in Britain, but their revival was a product of the Victorian age. In earlier centuries, carol singing was informal, often heard outdoors or during community gatherings. By the 19th century, editors collected old melodies and published them in hymn books. New carols were written. Choirs grew in size and church music became central to the holiday. By 1901, carols such as God Rest Ye Merry, Gentlemen, Hark, The Herald Angels, Sing and O Come All Ye Faithful were well known across Britain. They were sung in churches, schools, and homes. Families gathered around pianos to play music together. Children learned verses in schoolrooms. Carol singers traveled from door to door, raising funds for charities or community causes. Their presence signaled Christmas as clearly as snow or decorated trees. Churches prepared for the holiday with special services. In large cities, cathedrals filled with worshipers. The interiors were decorated with evergreen branches, holly, candles, and seasonal banners. On Christmas Eve, choirs rehearsed for midnight services. Organists prepared traditional hymns, while clergy planned sermons that reflected both faith and the changing times. The sound of church bells was one of the most familiar parts of Christmas. Bell towers marked the passing of hours, called worshipers to service, and signaled the arrival of Christmas morning. In rural villages, the ringing of bells carried across open fields. In crowded cities, the sound competed with street noise, horse carriages, and railway whistles. Still, the bells remained a symbol of tradition, heard by rich and poor alike. For many working families, Christmas services provided a rare moment of rest and reflection. Factory schedules paused, at least temporarily. Families walked together to local churches wearing their best clothes. Children listened to choirs, lighted candles, and familiar readings from the Bible. Even those who did not attend regularly often came for holiday services. The season encouraged community attendance. The Salvation Army played a significant role in the Christmas soundscape. Founded in 1865, the organization combined charitable work with public music. Brass bands performed carols in busy streets, outside shops, and near railway stations. The music attracted listeners who donated coins to support the poor. The Salvation Army distributed food, clothing, and coal to struggling families. In 1901, their Christmas efforts expanded across major industrial cities. The sight of uniformed musicians playing trumpets, cornets, and drums became a familiar part of the holiday atmosphere. Their music echoed off stone buildings and through narrow streets, offering moments of warmth on cold nights. Many people stopped to listen even if they could not afford to give. Music created a sense of shared experience, connecting strangers through familiar melodies. Choirs formed the core of church music. Many were volunteer groups of men, women, and children. In some towns, choir practice continued for weeks before Christmas. Members learned harmonies, rehearsed verses, and prepared for public performances. Children's choirs added a softer tone, their voices heard clearly in candlelit spaces in cathedrals and large churches. Professional choirs performed more complex arrangements. Organ music filled high ceilings accompanied by trained singers. These performances drew large crowds, with some people standing outside when seats ran out. Newspapers printed schedules of services and concerts encouraging attendance. Music also shaped domestic life. Middle-class families with pianos or harmoniums played carols at home. Songbooks and sheet music were sold in shops. Some families gathered around a small instrument each evening during December, marking the season with music. In wealthier homes, live musicians performed during Christmas parties or dinners. Working-class families listened rather than performed. Few could afford instruments or music lessons, but they heard carols in the streets, at churches, and in public houses. Some pub owners hired small bands or pianists for holiday nights, offering music alongside warm fires and hot drinks. Even in modest settings, music gave people a break from winter routine. Schools contributed to the season's sound. Teachers organized simple performances where children recited verses or sang carols for parents. Many schools gave small gifts, fruit, nuts, or sweets after the concert. These events, though simple, remained strong memories for children who had few other celebrations. In hospitals and workhouses, volunteers visited to sing Christmas hymns for those who could not leave. Charitable societies sent small choirs to prisons and orphanages. Music served as a gesture of kindness, offering comfort to people living in difficult circumstances. The connection between music and charity was deeply rooted in Victorian culture. Many believed that generosity was part of the Christmas message. Carols often carried themes of goodwill, peace, and compassion. Hymns such as "While Shepherds Watched Their Flocks and It Came Upon the Midnight Clear" spoke of hope and redemption. Their words provided reassurance at a time when the country faced uncertainty. The Boer War influenced Christmas music in 1901. Some choirs dedicated songs to soldiers abroad. Churches offered prayers for peace. Families hearing familiar hymns thought of loved ones serving overseas. In some towns, concerts raised funds for wounded soldiers or for families waiting at home. The sound of carols carried both tradition and quiet sorrow. In London, public concerts added another layer to the season. Theaters and music halls held special holiday performances. Audiences heard orchestras, vocal ensembles, and seasonal compositions. Tickets varied in price, allowing both wealthy and working people to attend. For many, a Christmas concert represented entertainment beyond the home. Even street musicians played a role. Violinists, organ grinders, and small bands performed on corners or outside public houses. Some earned modest income from holiday crowds. Others volunteered their music as part of community celebration, their melodies mixed with the sound of bells, market vendors, and passing carriages. Photography. Early sound recording machines were still a novelty, but they added a new dimension to Christmas music. Wealthy families who owned phonographs could listen to recorded songs at home. Limited recordings of hymns, orchestral pieces, and instrumental music were available. Although still rare, the technology hinted at a future where music would travel without live performers. Across Britain, despite differences in wealth or location, the sounds of Christmas united communities. Bells rang from towers in small villages and large cities. Choirs performed in humble chapels and grand cathedrals. Musicians played in crowded streets, foggy markets, and railway stations. The season had a recognizable rhythm, low, gentle, and filled with familiar melodies. For many, the sound of Christmas held memory. Older people recalled earlier winters, earlier hymns, and earlier gatherings. Children associated music with excitement and holiday anticipation. Even those who faced hardship found comfort in the yearly tradition. By December 1901, the Victorian musical legacy was firmly established. Carols printed in hymn books taught in schools and sung across the empire would carry into the 20th century. The melodies remained unchanged while the world around them shifted. Technology improved, cities expanded, and social change spread, but the songs endured. On Christmas Eve, church bells rang into the night. On Christmas morning, choirs lifted their voices. On cold winter evenings, the Salvation Army played carols beneath gas lamps, collecting coins for the needy. Music softened the harshness of winter and made the season feel familiar. Even in a changing world in the final Christmas of Victoria's reign, the soundscape of the holiday reflected everything the era had become. Organized, communal, charitable, and connected, music crossed class boundaries and filled public and private spaces. It carried tradition forward, reminding listeners of continuity in a time of transition. The bells, choirs, carols, and hymns of Christmas 1901 were more than background sound. They were part of a cultural inheritance that would continue long after the Victorian age ended. By December 1901, Britain stood on a quiet threshold. The Victorian era had shaped nearly every part of daily life, industry, society, culture, and belief. Yet, the world no longer looked like the early 1800s. In towns and cities across the country, signs of modernity had begun to appear. Winter still brought frost, coal smoke, and horse-drawn carriages, but alongside them came new inventions, new machines, and new ideas. It was a season balanced between familiar tradition and the slow rise of a new century. One of the most visible changes was light. Gas lamps still lined most streets, glowing through fog and smoke, but electricity had begun its steady expansion. In 1882, London opened its first public power station. By 1901, electric lighting illuminated theaters, department stores, railway stations, and parts of wealthy neighborhoods. During the Christmas season, some shops displayed electric lights in their windows, drawing crowds who came simply to watch the bulbs shine. People described the glow as cleaner, brighter, and steadier than gas flames. It was a technology still limited in reach, but symbolic of progress. Inside homes, gaslight remained dominant. Only the richest households could afford electric wiring, and most installations were confined to drawing rooms or entrance halls. Nevertheless, the idea of electricity spread quickly in newspapers and scientific journals. Advertisements promised a future with safer lighting, new appliances, and less smoke. In December 1901, electricity felt like a glimpse of the coming century. Something possible, but not yet universal. Transportation was also changing. For decades, horses had been the central force of movement. In London alone, more than 300 horses worked in transport, pulling carts, omnibuses, and hansom cabs. The streets were filled with hoofbeats, wheels striking cobblestone, and the calls of drivers navigating busy traffic. In winter, horses slipped on frozen roads and men spread sand to improve footing. The smell of manure and sweat filled the air, and city workers hauled waste daily to keep streets passable. Yet something new shared the streets: early automobiles. The internal combustion engine had arrived in Britain during the 1890s, but by 1901 it remained a rare sight. A small number of wealthy owners drove motor cars, often startling horses and drawing the curiosity of pedestrians. The machines were noisy, sometimes unreliable, and expensive to maintain. They moved faster than horse-drawn vehicles and required new rules for road safety. Newspapers debated whether motor cars represented the future or a passing novelty. Christmas shopping crowds sometimes gathered to watch an automobile pass through busy streets, its engine rattling and wheels turning without horses. In a single moment, one could see the past and future side by side, rows of hansom cabs, delivery carts, and occasionally a new machine powered by petrol rather than muscle. Railways continued to drive the economy. Steam trains transported passengers and goods across the country in every season. During winter, the sound of whistles echoed through valleys and towns. Millions of people traveled for Christmas using railway lines, packing station platforms with luggage, parcels, and seasonal cheer. Train travel had become ordinary and accessible, shrinking distances between cities and rural areas. Telephones were also slowly entering public life. Invented in the 1870s, they expanded through the 1880s and 1890s. But many households still relied on letters or telegraphs. Businesses used telephones to place orders, contact suppliers, or schedule deliveries. Some government offices and police stations installed them to share urgent messages. For most people, the telephone was something they had heard of but not yet used. Even so, it symbolized the coming century. instant voice communication replacing written correspondence. Another invention drew public attention: the moving picture. Motion cinema had appeared in the last years of the century, first as short reels shown in halls or fairgrounds. By 1901, small theaters and music halls offered brief films lasting a few minutes each. Audiences watched scenes of street life, travel beyond Britain's borders, or witness staged performances. The technology was new, but it represented a dramatic change, moving images captured and played, back something earlier generations could not have imagined. Scientific achievements continued to reshape thought. X-rays discovered in 1895 were now used in hospitals to examine broken bones. Advances in medicine promised treatments for diseases that had once seemed untreatable. Laboratories studied germs, vaccines, and sanitation. Public health reforms gained momentum with new laws targeting contaminated water, overcrowded housing, and unsafe working conditions. Although challenges remained, science offered solutions that earlier Victorians had not known. In winter, these scientific advances appeared in everyday life. Factories used improved machinery. Hospitals operated with better equipment. Even household products advertised modern ingredients and chemical advancements. The turn of the century felt like the beginning of a new relationship between ordinary people and technology. Yet, everyday life still held strong connections to the past. Clothes were heavy and layered. Coal-heated homes empowered factories. Children walked to school with books tied by strap or rope. Women prepared meals on iron stoves, boiling water in kettles that blackened with soot. Most of Britain still lived without electricity, telephones, or modern conveniences. Water pumps and coal fires shaped the rhythm of winter mornings. Christmas reflected this mixture of old and new. Many families lit candles or oil lamps beside decorated trees. Some placed small electric bulbs if they lived near modern power lines. Christmas cards traveled through the Royal Mail, while telegraph offices sent short holiday greetings. Carols were sung in churches built centuries earlier, while new hymns spread through printed hymn books. Department stores demonstrated the future of retail. Large displays of toys, clothing, and household items attracted crowds. Cashiers worked behind counters, and clerks wrapped parcels in paper and string. Some stores advertised electric lighting, elevators, or modern heating systems. Shopping became an experience: warm interiors, decorated windows, music, and organized displays. This was different from older markets and small shops. It spoke to a society growing more commercial, more organized, and more consumer-oriented. The bicycle influenced winter as well. Affordable models allowed workers to travel more quickly between home and job. Women rode bicycles independently without needing carriages or escorts. The bicycle had social impact, changing fashion and mobility. Even in December, riders moved through city streets, bundled in coats, navigating cold air and icy roads. Photography also shaped memory. Families posed for studio photographs during Christmas visits. Some sent printed photographs to relatives abroad, connecting distant parts of the empire. Cameras became more affordable, though not yet common, in every home. Photographs captured scenes that once could only be described in letters: decorated parlors, children's gifts, and snowy gardens in classrooms. Students learned subjects their grandparents had never studied. Science and geography expanded curriculum. Maps of the empire hung on school walls. Children memorized facts about continents, oceans, and trade routes. Education had changed dramatically since the early Victorian years. Literacy rose, and more children remained in school rather than entering work at a young age. At the same time, many working-class families still faced hardship. Modern inventions did not erase poverty. Coal remained expensive. Winter illnesses continued, but charities, trade unions, and government reforms slowly addressed conditions. New housing projects, clean water systems, and public sanitation improved life in some neighborhoods. Across the country, winter streets showed a mixture of centuries. A lamppost powered by gas stood beneath telegraph wires. A horse-drawn omnibus passed a motor car. A market stall sold handmade goods beside a shop window filled with imported toys. The soundtrack of the season included both church bells and the distant whistle of a steam locomotive. In this transition, people carried mixed feelings. Some welcomed modern progress, others preferred familiar ways. Newspapers wrote about the promise of the 20th century, faster communication, new medicines, and technological comfort. But many wondered what would be lost as the world changed. Old customs, rural life, and social traditions felt fragile. By Christmas 1901, Britain stood between eras. The Victorian age had created industry, empire, and powerful institutions. Now machines were growing more complex. Electricity, telephones, cinematography, and motorcars hinted at a different future. The winter carried the weight of history, but also the outline of change. In quiet homes, families lit candles and shared meals. In busy cities, crowds walked past electric shop windows. In small towns, church bells rang across frosted fields. The old and the new coexisted in the final winter of Victoria's reign. The century would soon bring social movements, world conflict, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural shifts that no one could fully imagine. But in December 1901, Britain was simply living through a winter of transition, a season where progress arrived slowly, silently, like snow settling across familiar streets. As December 1901 drew to a close, Britain reached the final New Year's Eve of the Victorian era. In earlier decades, New Year's celebrations had been simpler. Christmas was the dominant winter holiday, and many families treated the final night of the year with quiet reflection. But by the turn of the century, New Year's Eve had taken on a public presence. Streets filled with crowds, pubs remained open late, and music spilled onto cold winter air in London. The evening began with steady movement through major streets. Horse-drawn buses and hansom cabs carried passengers to dinners, theaters, and social gatherings. In wealthier neighborhoods, guests arrived at townhouses wearing heavy coats and gloves, greeting hosts in warm parlors lit by gas or in a few homes, electricity. Servants prepared tables with cold meats, pastries, fruit, and sparkling wine. Families talked about the year ahead, new politics, new inventions, and the question of what the 20th century would bring. For the middle class, clubs and restaurants held special dinners. Men in formal evening dress gathered to discuss business, the Boer War, or the Queen's fading health. Women attended in groups or with families, wearing elegant winter garments tailored to the season. Music halls hosted performances, attracting crowds that wanted entertainment before midnight. Audiences filled seats to hear comedians, small orchestras, singers, or short motion picture reels, signs of a social world expanding beyond the home. Public houses remained lively. Working men, sailors, and laborers met for drinks, warmth, and conversation. Some taverns hired small bands to play through the night. In industrial towns, factory workers finished long shifts and stepped into candlelit rooms for the briefest celebration. Even those with limited income found a way to mark the occasion, sharing a drink or a warm meal before returning home. Churches prepared New Year's services for those who preferred a quieter evening. In villages, bells rang at midnight, echoing across dark fields. In cities, the sound mixed with cheering crowds and the rattle of carriage wheels. Some congregations held watch night services, a tradition observed in parts of Britain and the Methodist Church. Families gathered in candlelit chapels, listening to hymns and prayer until the new year began. The service offered reflection rather than festivity, a moment to acknowledge passing time and hope for the future. For many households, New Year's Eve remained domestic. Families stayed indoors to escape winter cold. Children fell asleep before midnight. Adults sat near fireplaces speaking softly or reading newspapers. The stormier the night, the quieter the celebration. Coal fires glowed behind iron grates, windows frosted at the edges. The new year arrived without noise, marked only by a church bell or a distant shout in Scotland. New Year's Eve. Hogmanay was a deeply celebrated tradition. While English customs centered on Christmas, Scottish culture placed greater weight on the final night of the year. In Edinburgh and Glasgow, gatherings were larger, songs louder, and fires burned brighter. Families visited neighbors, shared food, and exchanged gifts. Crowds sang Auld Lang Syne, a Scottish song written by Robert Burns in the 18th century. By 1901, the song had spread across Britain and the Empire. It would soon become the familiar anthem of New Year's celebrations around the world. Some towns organized public fireworks displays. Though fireworks were not as common as in later decades, they appeared in cities with the resources to host them. Rockets burst above rooftops, leaving trails of sparks in the winter sky. In London, small displays appeared near parks and rivers. People gathered in clusters, watching bright colors disappear into fog and darkness. Railway stations remained active on New Year's Eve. Travelers arrived to visit relatives or return to work after Christmas. Porters carried luggage across platforms. The smell of coal smoke drifted from locomotives. Station clocks marked the final minutes of the year, each tick amplified by passengers waiting for the next train. For some, midnight came while sitting inside a railway carriage, watching lamps pass through the night. Newspapers printed articles predicting change in the coming century. Writers discussed the future of electricity, medicine, and transportation. Some questioned the strength of the empire. Others expressed confidence that British power would endure. Editorials described the end of Victoria's reign, which now seemed close, even if the exact day was unknown. Many readers entered the new year aware that history was turning. Telegraph offices remained busy. Short New Year greetings traveled across Britain and across oceans. Families sent messages to soldiers in South Africa, sailors at sea, and relatives abroad. For those far from home, a telegram was a reminder that they were not forgotten. In households where loved ones were missing, serving overseas, lost to illness, or working in distant cities, the new year carried both hope and sorrow. Families prayed for safe returns. Children slept with unopened letters nearby. The war continued, and many knew that 1902 would bring further news of casualties and hardship. As midnight approached in cities, crowds gathered near public landmarks. In London, people stood near Trafalgar Square, the Embankment, and Westminster Bridge. Gas lamps flickered above the crowd. Cold air frosted breath into white clouds. Some groups carried pocket watches, counting down the final seconds. When midnight arrived, cheers rose into the cold sky. Church bells answered the celebration. A few fireworks cracked in the distance. Strangers shook hands, wished each other well, and sang familiar songs. In small villages, the new year arrived quietly. A single bell rang from a stone church. Farmers slept in preparation for early work. Some families remained awake to greet the turning of the calendar. Windows glowed in the darkness. The sound of a clock striking 12 drifted across fields and silent roads dawn in Scotland. Doors opened after midnight to welcome first footers, the first person to enter a home in the new year. Tradition held that a dark-haired visitor brought good luck, while others brought less favorable fortune. Gifts such as coal, bread, or whiskey symbolized warmth, food, and hospitality. These customs linked the modern world to older rites that predated Victorian influence. Across the empire, New Year's Eve arrived at different hours and in different climates. In Canada, families celebrated in deep winter. In Australia, summer wind carried the sound of fireworks and music across warm nights. In India, churches held evening services while British officials gathered in clubs or private homes. In South Africa, soldiers exchanged wishes in tents or small outposts. The holiday did not erase hardship, but it reminded people of home and continuity. In most places, New Year's Day brought no grand ceremony. Shops reopened. Workers returned to factories. Children played outdoors, if weather allowed. The new year began like any other winter morning. But the symbolic meaning of the night before lingered. The Victorian era had lasted more than 60 years longer than most people's memories. Those born after 1837 had never known another monarch. But the world of 1901 was not the world of Victoria's coronation. Industrial cities covered land once occupied by farms, railways crossed the nation, steamships connected continents, telegraph lines carried messages faster than ships could sail. Modern medicine, science, and engineering reshaped life. As people stepped into 1902, they could sense the shift. Change did not arrive in a single moment, but it moved quietly, like snow accumulating overnight. The final New Year's Eve of the Victorian age was both a celebration and a transition. The old century faded behind lamplight and song. The new one approached with unknown challenges and possibilities. In the early hours of January the 1st, streets emptied. Fires burned low in parlors, bells fell silent, fog settled over rooftops. A new year had begun, carrying with it the final weeks of Queen Victoria's reign and the beginning of a century that would redefine the world. The last Victorian New Year's Eve passed into memory, simple, hopeful, and suspended between two eras. The new year began with quiet uncertainty. The nation had celebrated Christmas and welcomed the first days of 1902, but behind palace walls, anxiety deepened. Queen Victoria had been frail for years, yet the changes in her health during January were unmistakable. She was 81 years old, and the weight of 6 decades on the throne now showed clearly. Her final days took place far from London in a residence that had become her refuge from public life, Osbourne House on the Isle of Wight. Victoria had retreated to Osbourne for the holiday season, as she had in many previous years. The house, built for privacy and comfort, offered separation from court ceremony. Views of the Solent calm gardens and quiet corridors gave her space to rest. But in early January, her condition began to decline more rapidly. Fatigue increased. She struggled to eat. Her eyesight, once strong enough to read official papers daily, weakened. She spent more time in bed, cared for by physicians and attendants. The royal household responded with secrecy. Messages traveled discreetly between Osbourne and London. Government ministers were informed, but the public received only brief bulletins. Newspapers published short reports with careful language. The Queen was tired, needing rest, receiving attention from doctors. Rumors grew, but no official confirmation appeared. After decades of public life, the palace chose privacy at the end. As her condition worsened, family members were summoned. Prince Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, arrived from Marlborough House. His presence at Osbourne was itself a sign. He had long been kept at a respectful distance from affairs of state, but now his role as future king approached. His eldest son, the Duke of York, also came. Princesses Helena, Beatrice, and Louise traveled to the Isle of Wight. Other relatives crossed the Channel from Europe, including Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Victoria's grandson through her eldest child. Messages traveled quickly by telegraph. Special trains carried family members to southern ports. Steam vessels crossed the Solent, even in winter mist. At Osbourne, carriages brought arrivals up the long drive. Servants moved quietly through hallways, preparing rooms for grieving relatives who tried to remain composed. The presence of so many family members could not remain hidden from the public. Newspapers reported arrivals without confirming the reason. Some speculated about a sudden illness. Others suggested exhaustion from age. The tone of the reporting changed as January progressed. Phrases such as improving and resting comfortably disappeared. In their place appeared words like concern, serious and uncertain. Across the nation, people read each update. Even those who felt distant from the monarchy recognized the gravity of the moment. For older citizens, Victoria had been a constant figure. For younger generations, she was the only monarch they had ever known. Her reign stretched back before the invention of railways, telegraph cables, electric light, and modern industry. The country that existed when she came to the throne no longer resembled the one she would leave behind. Parliament remained alert. Government ministers prepared for transition. Plans already existed for mourning protocol, military arrangements, and succession. But until official confirmation came, nothing could proceed. The cabinet waited for news from Osbourne, keeping contact through telegrams and emissaries. In early January, the Queen became less responsive. Doctors reported weakness, drowsiness, and loss of appetite. They stayed close to her bedside, monitoring vital signs and offering what comfort medicine of the time allowed. The palace chaplain visited. Prayer services were held quietly within the residence. Outside Osbourne House, winter remained cold and still. Frost covered the ground each morning. Trees stood bare against gray skies. Guards patrolled silently. Even the sea seemed subdued, waves hitting the shoreline without force. Nature contributed to the subdued atmosphere that surrounded the estate. On January 17th, the first official messages stated plainly that the Queen was seriously ill. Newspapers printed large headlines. Crowds gathered outside post offices and newsstands for the latest reports. Families discussed the news at dinner tables and workplaces. Churches held special prayers. Though the country continued its routines, a collective pause settled over the population. By January 20th, the situation had reached its final stage. Family members stayed close to the Queen's room. Doctors remained present. The Prince of Wales received frequent updates. Kaiser Wilhelm visited her bedside, those who had known her for decades. Ladies-in-waiting, long-serving attendants and private secretaries stood nearby, aware that they were witnessing the closing moment of an era. There were no public speeches, no sudden announcements, no dramatic scenes. The Queen's final hours passed quietly. On January 22, 1901, at around 6:30 in the evening, Queen Victoria died at Osbourne House. She had reigned for 63 years and 216 days, the longest reign in British history up to that time. Her passing marked the end of the Victorian era. The moment was recorded in official documents and private diaries. Telegrams carried the news across Britain and to the Empire. Within hours, London newspapers printed special editions. In Scotland, bells tolled from steeples. In industrial cities, factory whistles signaled the announcement. In villages, pastors received messages from telegraph boys and prepared church services. For many, the news brought silence. Even those critical of the monarchy recognized the magnitude of the event. The Queen had presided over profound change, scientific discovery, industrial expansion, political upheaval, imperial growth, and social reform. Generations had come and gone under her reign. At Osbourne, the mood remained solemn. Family members comforted one another. The Prince of Wales, now King Edward VII, began immediate discussions with ministers and officials. Funeral arrangements followed strict protocol. The Queen had left detailed instructions for her burial, including her desire for military honors and a white funeral, emphasizing sentiment over ornament. When the procession traveled from Osbourne House to London, thousands gathered along the route. Soldiers marched in formation, navy vessels signaled respect along the coast, bands played solemn music. The coffin reached Windsor, where she was laid to rest beside Prince Albert. For many, the funeral symbolized the final closing of the Victorian age. But history did not pause. Britain continued to function with discipline and routine. The government operated, industry produced goods, ships crossed the seas, life continued, but with a subtle difference. The certainty of the past gave way to the unknown direction of a new century. Edward VII began shaping his own court style and priorities. The strict morality of the Victorian era relaxed. Social life at court became more open, more cosmopolitan. Diplomacy grew in importance. The king valued international relationships and traveled more frequently than his mother ever had. Foreign leaders visited London, and alliances shifted. Within a few years, Britain signed agreements with France and later Russia, reshaping European politics and setting the groundwork for a century marked by cooperation and conflict. Technology advanced quickly. Electricity spread beyond theaters and wealthy homes. Cities built power stations to light entire districts. Telegraph lines multiplied. Telephones became more common in businesses and government offices. Railways expanded and improved. Automobiles increased in number, requiring new laws and signaling systems. The world of horse-drawn streets slowly gave way to engines and machines. Science moved at a pace that Victorians could not have imagined. Medicine developed vaccines, disinfectants, and antiseptics. Hospitals improved hygiene. Researchers studied bacteria and disease, reducing deaths from infection. X-ray machines, still new in 1901, became valuable tools for diagnosing injury. Public health campaigns addressed unsafe housing, polluted water, and overcrowded neighborhoods. Literacy continued to grow. Newspapers became more affordable, and more households subscribed. Publishing expanded, offering magazines, novels, educational materials, and illustrated news. Through the printed word, the public learned about politics, fashion, science, and discoveries from across the world. Global connections strengthened. Telegraph cables linked continents. Steamships traveled faster than sailing vessels. Passenger travel increased. Goods moved across seas with greater efficiency. Letters took weeks instead of months to cross the empire. For the first time, people felt part of a world that communicated in near real time. But the Victorian world did not vanish overnight. Many aspects of daily life remained unchanged. Coal continued to heat homes and power factories. Working-class families lived with limited wages, long hours, and unstable employment. Children in poorer districts entered labor at young ages. Winter illnesses still caused hardship. Poverty did not disappear with a new king. Social reform slowly continued. Campaigns for women's voting rights expanded. Labor movements demanded safer working conditions. Charities provided food, clothing, and shelter to the poor. Churches offered support through missions and relief societies. The Edwardian period carried forward debates that had begun under Victoria education, housing, health, and equality. Christmas traditions remained strong. Families decorated trees, exchanged cards, and sent gifts by post. Children looked forward to puddings, crackers, and sweets. Carols were sung in crowded churches beneath gaslight and candlelight. In wealthier homes, electricity gradually replaced candles on Christmas trees, reducing danger and offering a brighter display. Stores advertised modern toys, board games, illustrated books, and mechanical novelties. The memory of Queen Victoria did not fade. Portraits remained on walls. Statues and memorials appeared in cities and towns. Streets and public buildings carried her name. In schools, children learned about her reign and the expansion of the empire. For many who lived through it, the Victorian age became a reference point, a distant but familiar era of stability and discipline. Yet, history continued moving forward. The new century brought changes that no one in 1901 could fully predict. New ideologies emerged, international rivalries deepened, technology advanced at a pace that touched every part of life. Within just over a decade, the world would enter a conflict far beyond anything the Victorians imagined, the First World War. But in 1901 and 1902, most families lived quietly. They wrote letters, raised children, worked long hours, and gathered for holidays. The spirit of Victorian Christmas survived even as the world around it evolved. Decorations, music, food, and familiar customs remained part of winter. The last Victorian Christmas slowly became a memory held in the minds of those who experienced it for people who lived through the transition. The difference between the Victorian and Edwardian eras was not always obvious. Change arrived gradually. Streets were not suddenly modern. Clothing did not instantly transform. Technology appeared in small increments. Daily life continued with routines learned over generations. But historians would look back and see a clear boundary. The death of Victoria closed a long chapter. She had been monarch during the rise of railways, telegraphs, photography, anesthesia, indoor plumbing, and public education. She had presided over the expansion of the British Empire and the building of industrial cities. She had witnessed revolutions in science, literature, and global communication. The world after 1901 would continue all those paths, but it would do so without the symbol that had defined the era. Edward VII's reign would be shorter and shaped by different priorities. Social customs relaxed, modern fashion emerged, society became more international in taste and influence. The final Victorian Christmas celebrated in December 1901 with carols, shop windows, cold walks, coal fires, and family gatherings remained in the memories of millions. For years afterward, elderly citizens would say, "I remember the Christmas before the Queen died." It became a marker of time, dividing past and present. Some things remained unchanged: the warmth of holiday meals, the ringing of church bells, the excitement of children waking early on Christmas morning. Communities continued, traditions passed down from earlier generations, but the modern world moved steadily forward, carrying electricity, automobiles, radio, cinema, and aviation into everyday life. By the middle of the century, the Victorian world would seem distant, almost ancient. Photographs and film captured its buildings, clothing, and streets, but the rhythm of life had changed too deeply to compare. The winter of 1901 eventually became a historical point, studied, remembered, and interpreted by scholars, but no longer experienced firsthand. What changed was nearly everything: transportation, communication, medicine, war, education, and social order. What remained was memory held in diaries, letters, photographs, and stories passed through families. The last Victorian Christmas was part of that memory. A cold winter lit by gas lamps, warmed by coal fires, shaped by tradition, and lived beneath the final months of a monarch whose name defined an age. History turned quietly. There were no dramatic announcements, no sudden rupture. The change came with a new year, a new reign, and the steady movement of time. From that point onward, Britain stood in a new century, carrying with it both the weight of the past and the beginnings of a future that would transform the world. The last Victorian Christmas remained a symbol of a world that once felt stable, orderly, and familiar. And like all eras, it passed, leaving behind memories, photographs, and the echo of carols sung under winter skies.